The multiverse is a tapestry of infinite realities, each with its own immutable laws. But what happens when a thread from one universe tears through into another, bringing a legend who operates by rules that shouldn't exist? When the dark night of Gotham falls into a world where children are raised as weapons and shadows hold more than fear, even preparation has its limits. The forest outside Konoha was quiet in the way that warned of predators, a silence too deliberate, too watchful. Bruce Wayne had learned to read such silences in Gotham's crime alleys. But this was different. The air itself felt wrong, thick with something his suit's sensors couldn't identify. Energy readings spiked and flatlined in patterns that made no sense. The canopy above filtered moonlight into silver fragments, and somewhere in the distance, he heard running water. He'd been fighting Darkseid's parademons 30 seconds ago. Batman remembered the boom tube explosion, the sickening lurch of reality, folding inside out, Brother Eye's warning shriek cutting off mid-syllable. Now he was here, wherever here was, with no communication, no GPS, no connection to anything recognizable. Bruce touched his cowl. The heads-up display flickered with static. Backup power only. He had maybe 6 hours of sensor capability, less if he engaged the suit's defensive systems. The utility belt was intact, most gadgets accounted for. But without resupply or repair capability, every batarang and smoke pellet became irreplaceable. Analyze, he growled to himself, falling back on training when technology failed. The trees were wrong, too large, too old. With bark that seemed to drink the moonlight, the undergrowth was thick with plants he didn't recognize, and the soil beneath his boots had a different texture than any terrain he'd encountered. The air smelled of pine and something else, something sharp and electric that made his instincts scream. Warning. Movement, 30 yards northeast, barely a rustle of leaves. Batman melted into shadow, cape spreading to break his silhouette. His breathing slowed, heart rate dropping to operational minimum. In Gotham, he was the thing criminals feared in the dark. That advantage worked anywhere. The figure that emerged from the tree line moved like liquid, human-sized, wearing what looked like tactical gear and a porcelain animal mask, a cat's face painted with red markings. The movement patterns were all wrong. Not military precision, not criminal desperation. Something else entirely. The masked figure paused, head tilting as if listening to sounds Batman couldn't hear. Then it spoke. The language was incomprehensible, syllables that followed no linguistic pattern Batman recognized. But the tone was clear. Alert, questioning, calling to others. 3 more figures materialized from the forest. Not emerged, materialized. One moment the shadows were empty, the next they contained masked operatives in identical gear. Dog, bird, and rabbit, masks. All carried short swords on their backs, and their body language communicated military discipline. One of them pointed directly at Batman's position. Impossible. He hadn't moved, hadn't made a sound. The shadow coverage was complete, but all 4 masked figures oriented on him instantly, their postures shifting to combat readiness. Detective mode is offline, Batman muttered. He'd have to do this the old-fashioned way. He stepped into moonlight, hands visible but ready. The universal language of non-aggression: show you're not an immediate threat, buy time to assess capabilities. The reaction was instantaneous. All 4 figures blurred. Batman's mind processed it in the fraction of a second before they closed distance. They moved faster than human, crossing 30 yards in heartbeats. Not speedster fast, but enhanced. Superhuman agility with coordination that spoke of decades of training. The cat-masked figure struck first, a spinning kick aimed at his head. Batman ducked, pivoted, drove an elbow strike toward exposed ribs. It connected. He felt the impact. But the figure twisted in midair, using the momentum to backflip away. The dog-masked operative came low, sweeping his legs. Batman jumped, cape billowing, and threw two batarangs at the bird-masked figure closing from his left. The projectiles should have found their marks. Instead, the bird-masked operative's hands moved in a blur, and both batarangs deflected off a kunai that appeared in its grip like magic. No, not magic. Sleight of hand. Quick draw from a holster Batman hadn't seen. Fast, but not impossible. The rabbit-masked figure's hands moved through a sequence of positions, too fast to follow, fingers forming shapes that looked almost ritualistic. Then it slammed both palms on the ground. The earth erupted. A wall of dirt and stone shot up between Batman and the other three operatives, 8 feet high and solid. Batman's analytical mind staggered. No explosives, no mechanism, just hand, gestures and the ground obeying like it was alive. Metahuman, had to be. Earth manipulation similar to Terra or Clay Face. But the activation method was completely different. Batman grappled to the nearest tree, ascending 20 feet in seconds. Height advantage, time to reassess. But when he reached the branch, all 4 figures were already there, perched on surrounding branches with impossible balance. The cat-masked one spoke again, words sharp and demanding, a command or question. When Batman didn't respond, it drew the short sword from its back. The blade gleamed in moonlight, and Batman's instincts screamed. He'd fought countless swordsmen, Ra's al Ghul, Deathstroke, League of Assassins operatives. He knew lethal intent when he saw it. "I'm not your enemy," Batman said, knowing they wouldn't understand the words, but hoping the tone conveyed meaning. The sword came down. Batman caught the wrist, redirected the strike past his head, drove a knee toward the operative's solar plexus. The impact should have cracked ribs. Instead, the cat-masked figure absorbed it with a grunt, twisted free with strength that matched Batman's own, and kicked off the branch. All 4 operatives jumped simultaneously, forming a perimeter around his tree. Then their hands moved again, those same rapid gesture sequences. The air itself seemed to thicken, pressure building like before a lightning strike. Whatever they were about to do, Batman's instincts said it would end the fight. He dropped a smoke pellet. Thick gray clouds erupted, obscuring the entire area. In the confusion, Batman fired his grapnel, swinging toward denser forest. If he could break line of sight, lose them in terrain, he'd have time to... The smoke cleared instantly, not dispersed by wind, erased, gone as if it had never existed, and the 4 masked figures stood exactly where he'd seen them last, completely unaffected. The dog-masked operative's hands blurred through another sequence. This time, Batman watched carefully. 12 distinct hand positions in under 2 seconds, fingers forming symbols or signs. A pattern, a language of gestures. Fire erupted from the operative's mouth, not a flamethrower, not a metahuman mutation. The figure inhaled and breathed a stream of flame that turned night to day. Heat washing over Batman's position with enough intensity to scorch bark. Batman dove, rolled, came up with his cape wrapped defensively. The flame-retardant material held, but his mind was racing. Fire breath, earth manipulation, superhuman speed, and that instantaneous movement technique. Either he'd encountered a team of incredibly diverse metahumans, or something else was happening here. The rabbit-masked figure appeared behind him. No running, no sound, just suddenly there. And struck. Batman blocked the punch, countered with a palm strike to the chin that should have dropped a normal human. The mask cracked, revealing pale skin beneath, and the operative staggered back. But 3 more immediately took its place. Batman fought with everything he had: Krav Maga to break holds, Judo to redirect momentum, Muay Thai strikes to vital points, Casey for close quarters chaos. Every martial art he'd mastered, every technique he'd perfected over decades of training. He landed hits, he dodged attacks, he adapted to their patterns. But they were learning too. And they kept using those hand gestures, those impossible techniques that defied physics. A wire wrapped around his ankle, thin, nearly invisible, manipulated by the cat-masked operative with precision that suggested this was standard procedure. Batman cut it with a batarang, but the distraction cost him. The bird-masked figure drove a palm strike into his chest plate. The impact rang through armor designed to disperse rifle rounds. Batman hit the ground, rolled, came up in defensive stance. All 4 operatives stood watching him, weapons drawn but not immediately attacking. The message was clear. They'd assessed his capabilities and found him dangerous but containable. The cat-masked figure spoke again, voice muffled by porcelain. This time, Batman heard something almost like respect in the tone. Then hands moved through gestures in perfect unison. The air pressure spiked, and darkness took him, not from injury, but from something that bypassed physical damage entirely and struck directly at consciousness. When the world faded, Batman's last coherent thought was analysis. Not metahumans. Something else. Technology, magic, need data. Gotham's dark night fell into unconsciousness, in a world that didn't know his name, captured by warriors who fought with rules he didn't understand. But Bruce Wayne had built a legend on adaptation, and legends, no matter what universe, learned. Consciousness returned in fragments. Pain first. Dull ache across his ribs where that palm strike had connected. Then awareness of restraints. Arms bound behind his back, legs secured at the ankles. High-grade rope, professionally tied with knots designed to tighten under resistance. Batman tested them with subtle movements, extremely well made. Escaping would take time he might not have. His cowl was still on. Interesting. Either they didn't know it contained technology, or they'd already determined it was non-functional. The utility belt was gone. He felt its absence like a missing limb. 20 years of reflexively reaching for specific pouches, and now there was only empty space. Bruce opened his eyes to filtered sunlight and wood grain. He was in a cell, not a prison cell, but a holding room with wooden walls and a single barred window. Traditional construction, pre-industrial techniques. The air smelled of pine and paper and something else he couldn't identify, that same electric sharpness from the forest. 2 guards stood outside the bars, both wearing the same tactical gear as his captors, but without masks. Young, late teens or early 20s. Their postures radiated alertness despite the casual way they leaned against the wall. Both carried those short swords, and Batman noticed they also had pouches similar to his utility belt. Tool users. Prepared combatants. One of them noticed he was awake and called out. The language was still incomprehensible, but the cadence suggested reporting rather than threatening. Footsteps approached. Multiple people moving with purpose. The cell door opened, and Batman cataloged everything. First through was a woman in her 20s with pink hair, unusual, possibly dyed or metahuman, carrying herself with medical professional confidence. Behind her came a man with silver hair that defied gravity, one eye covered by a mask, the other regarding Batman with lazy assessment that didn't match the coiled readiness in his stance. Dangerous. Very dangerous. The third figure commanded immediate attention. Woman, blonde, probably 50s, with a face that showed she'd lived through significant trauma. But it was her eyes that marked her as the authority. Sharp, calculating, and absolutely unwilling to tolerate threats. She wore a robe with characters Batman didn't recognize, but the deference shown by the others marked her as leadership. The blonde woman studied him in silence for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Batman stayed silent. Give nothing. Learn everything. The silver-haired man said something with a slight smile that didn't reach his visible eye. The tone suggested dark humor. The blonde woman shot him a look that could have frozen fire, and he raised his hands in mock surrender. Then she turned back to Batman and spoke slowly, clearly, as if trying to communicate across a language barrier. When he didn't respond, she gestured to the pink-haired woman, who stepped forward with what looked like medical equipment. Batman tensed. If they were going to examine him, remove the cowl, discover his identity. The blonde woman held up one hand, stopping the medic. Then she did something unexpected. She pointed to herself and said a single word. Tsunade. A name. She was introducing herself. The silver-haired man pointed to himself. Kakashi. They were trying to establish basic communication. Not interrogation through torture or truth serums, not yet at least, but attempting dialogue. Batman made a decision. He pointed to himself with his chin, since his hands were bound, and spoke the only name he'd give them. Batman. Both of them reacted to the word. Tsunade's eyes narrowed. Kakashi's visible eye widened slightly before returning to that lazy assessment. They conversed rapidly in their language, and Batman caught what might have been repetition of Batman with questioning intonation. Then Tsunade made a gesture, and one of the guards stepped forward with a kunai, that throwing knife he'd seen earlier. Batman's muscles coiled, preparing for whatever came next. But the guard simply cut his restraints. The message was clear. They were offering a measure of trust, or at least testing his response to freedom. Batman stood slowly, keeping his movements non-threatening. His body cataloged injuries, bruised ribs, strained shoulder, nothing that would significantly impair function. The room was 12 by 12 feet, single exit, bars on the window. The guards were positioned to intercept any escape attempt, and both Tsunade and Kakashi watched him with the focus of apex predators. Kakashi said something and gestured to the window. Batman moved to it, and his analytical mind went into overdrive. The village spread below like nothing he'd ever seen. Traditional architecture, wood and tile roofs, buildings that looked pre-industrial revolution, but on a massive scale. Thousands of structures cascading down from what appeared to be cliff faces, with enormous carved faces watching over everything. People moved through streets in that same tactical gear, jumping between rooftops with casual superhuman agility. And everywhere, absolutely everywhere, that strange energy signature his suit had detected. This wasn't a hidden metahuman community. This was an entire civilization operating on principles his world didn't have. "Where am I?" Batman asked, knowing they wouldn't understand the words but needing to voice the question. Tsunade seemed to recognize inquiry. She gestured broadly at the village and said a word that sounded like Konoha. Then she tapped her forehead protector, a metal plate with a stylized leaf symbol, and repeated it. Konoha. The village name, or maybe nation. Batman committed it to memory. Kakashi pulled out a map, actual paper, hand-drawn with impressive detail, and spread it on the small table. He pointed to locations, speaking slowly, clearly trying to convey geographical information. Batman studied the map intensely. 5 major settlements marked with different symbols, vast territories between them. Topography that suggested this was a substantial landmass, possibly continent-sized. He pointed to where Kakashi had indicated Konoha, then gestured around them in question. Kakashi nodded confirmation. Then Batman pointed to the other 4 settlements and raised his eyebrows in question. Kakashi's expression became more guarded. He said names: Suna, Kiri, Kumo, Iwa. But his tone suggested these weren't allies, rival nations or factions. Batman absorbed it all. 5 major powers, territorial boundaries, and he'd materialized near one of them. The fact that they'd captured rather than killed him suggested either mercy, intelligence gathering, or potential recruitment. Possibly all 3. Tsunade spoke again, her tone shifting to something more formal. She gestured to Batman, then to herself and Kakashi, then made a talking gesture. Interview or interrogation. They wanted answers. Batman had questions of his own. He held up his hand and made a gesture mimicking those rapid hand signs he'd seen. Then he pointed at the guards, at Kakashi, questioning. Both leaders exchanged glances. Kakashi spoke quietly to Tsunade, and Batman caught what might have been surprise or confusion in their exchange. Finally, Tsunade nodded. Kakashi stepped back and performed the hand gesture sequence slowly, still faster than Batman could fully track, but deliberate enough to show it was intentional technique, not random movement. Then he held up one hand, and electricity crackled across his palm. Not from a device, from his skin, bioelectric generation. But controlled, focused, weaponized beyond anything Batman had encountered. The energy danced between Kakashi's fingers like a living thing, casting blue-white light across the room with a sound like 1,000 birds chirping. Then Kakashi closed his fist, and the electricity vanished. He raised his eyebrow at Batman in clear question. "Do you understand?" Batman did. The hand gestures weren't mystic passes or religious ritual. They were technique activation, some kind of somatic component to abilities that might be biological, technological, or something else entirely. These people had powers, yes, but powers that required specific training and methodology, which meant they could be studied, understood, countered. Batman nodded slowly. Then he made a gesture to himself and shook his head. He couldn't do what they did. Not yet. Tsunade's expression shifted to something almost like pity. She spoke to Kakashi, who responded with that dark humor tone again. Then she turned back to Batman and made a complicated series of gestures, pointing to him, to the village, making talking motions, then crossing her arms and shaking her head before pointing to the cell. The message parsed. "If you cooperate and communicate, you stay here comfortably. If you don't, the cell remains locked." Batman had been in worse negotiations. He pointed to himself, then to the map, then made a clear questioning gesture. The universal sign for, "Where did I come from?" Tsunade's eyes sharpened with interest. She gestured for him to continue. Batman picked up a piece of charcoal from the table. They'd been making marks on the map, and moved to the wooden wall. He drew quickly. A simple representation of Earth's continents. North America, South America, Europe, Africa, Asia, Australia. Rough but recognizable to anyone familiar with geography. Then he pointed to North America's east coast, approximately where Gotham would be, and tapped himself. Both Tsunade and Kakashi stared at the drawing. They conversed rapidly, voices rising with what sounded like disbelief or confusion. Kakashi pulled out the map again and held it next to Batman's drawing. They didn't match. At all. The map Kakashi held showed a completely different continental configuration, similar landmass sizes, similar climate zones. But the shapes were wrong. The positions were wrong. This wasn't Earth. Or if it was an Earth so geologically different that millions of years of tectonic drift couldn't explain it. Batman's mind raced through possibilities. Parallel Earth, alternate dimension, extremely distant future after geological restructuring. Or, and this was becoming more likely, he'd crossed into a completely different universe with its own laws, its own physics, its own everything. Tsunade seemed to reach a similar conclusion. She spoke quietly to Kakashi, her tone grave. He responded with something that made her close her eyes and pinch the bridge of her nose, the universal gesture of a leader dealing with an impossible situation. Then she looked at Batman with new assessment, not as a spy or infiltrator, but as a genuine anomaly, something that shouldn't exist here. Kakashi said something and made a gesture that encompassed Batman's entire form, questioning. Then he pulled down the mask covering his lower face. Batman caught a glimpse of sharp features and tapped his chest, his head, gesturing to his body while speaking. Finally, he pointed at Batman with clear question. "Are you human?" That's what he was asking. Batman pulled back his cowl just enough to show his face. Jaw, mouth, enough to prove he was human beneath the armor. Several guards tensed, hands moving to weapons, but Tsunade waved them off. For a moment, Bruce Wayne's actual face was visible. Human. Scarred from years of combat, but undeniably human. He pulled the cowl back into place and met Tsunade's eyes directly. She studied him for a long moment, then made a decision. She spoke to Kakashi with clear command authority. He nodded, though his expression suggested reluctance. Tsunade turned back to Batman and made a series of gestures, pointing to him, to the room, making sleeping and eating motions, then holding up fingers. Days. She was telling him he'd stay here, comfortable, fed, not tortured, while they decided what to do with him. Then she made one more gesture that needed no translation. Her hand moved to her throat in a clear cutting motion. If he tried to escape or caused harm, the mercy ended. Batman nodded, understanding. Tsunade left, taking most of the guards with her. But Kakashi remained, leaning against the wall with that deceptive casualness. He said something in a conversational tone, gestured to Batman's suit, and raised his visible eyebrow. Batman caught the gist. "Where did you get equipment like that?" Bruce pointed to his own head, made a building gesture with his hands, then pointed to himself again. "I made it." Kakashi's eye widened slightly. Then he smiled, a genuine expression of what might have been respect, and said something that sounded like acknowledgement. The silver-haired man turned to leave, but paused at the door. He looked back at Batman and spoke a single word, slowly and clearly. "Ninja." Then he pointed to himself and repeated it. Ninja. He was giving Batman vocabulary, telling him what they were called, what this society was built on. Batman committed the word to memory and nodded thanks. When the door closed and locked, Bruce Wayne sat on the simple cot and began processing everything he'd learned. A world of ninjas with superhuman abilities activated through gesture-based techniques. 5 major powers in political tension. Technology level pre-industrial, but with capabilities that defied his understanding. And he was trapped here with no equipment, no allies, and no way home. In Gotham, he was the world's greatest detective. Here, he was an illiterate outsider who couldn't even speak the language. But Bruce Wayne had built an empire from nothing, forged himself into a weapon through pure will, and become a legend that terrified the criminal underworld. The methodology didn't change just because the universe did. Learn the language, learn the power system, learn the factions and their conflicts. Find allies or create opportunities, survive, adapt, overcome. Batman stared through the barred window at the village called Konoha and began planning his next move. 3 days of observation taught Batman more than any interrogation could have. they brought him food. Rice, fish, vegetables prepared simply but with care that suggested they weren't actively trying to harm him. The pink-haired woman, who he learned was called Sakura through repeated interactions, checked his injuries daily with medical knowledge that seemed advanced despite the pre-industrial setting. She worked without speaking much, but her hands moved with trained precision when examining the bruising across his ribs. Bruce used every interaction to learn. He pointed at objects and waited for names. Table, tsukue, window, mado, water, mizu. The guards found his attempts at pronunciation amusing, but they corrected him patiently. Either Tsunade had ordered them to cooperate, or they were genuinely curious about the strange man who'd appeared in their forest. Kakashi visited twice daily, always casual, always observant. He brought books written in the local script and sat, reading while Batman studied the characters. On the second day, he'd brought children's primers, basic reading materials with pictures. The gesture might have been condescending from anyone else, but Kakashi's visible eye held only pragmatism. You need to learn. Here are tools. Batman memorized 43 characters by the end of day 2. By day 3, he could recognize basic sentence structure. But language was secondary to the real education happening beyond his window. The village operated on patterns. Mornings saw waves of these ninja heading out in teams, usually groups of 3 or 4, moving with purpose toward the main gates. Missions, Batman deduced. Assignments that required their particular skill sets. Evening brought them back, some triumphant, others carrying wounded. The medical building Sakura emerged from daily saw constant traffic. The ninja weren't just warriors. They were the entire economic and social foundation of the society. He watched them on rooftops, performing maintenance, saw them training in open courtyards with those hand gestures, observed them escorting civilians and delivering messages and performing what looked like construction work using those impossible abilities. A ninja made stone walls rise from nothing. Another produced water from thin air to irrigate gardens. A third moved so fast they appeared in multiple places simultaneously. No, Batman corrected himself after careful observation. That was a trick. Substitution with logs or objects, sleight of hand performed at superhuman speed to create the illusion of teleportation. Illusion. The word stuck with him because of what had happened on the third night. He'd been reviewing his mental map of the village layout when the guards changed shift. The new arrival was younger, maybe 16, with spiky brown hair and an eager energy that marked him as inexperienced. The kid had glanced at Batman, said something to his partner, and suddenly Batman was staring at 2 identical guards. No, not identical. One was real, one was projection, hard light hologram. Batman's mind scrambled for explanations, but then the duplicate vanished in a puff of smoke and the young guard laughed at his partner's reaction. Illusion. Solid enough to be seen and possibly touched, but ultimately insubstantial, and created with just a hand gesture. That night, Batman couldn't sleep. He stood at the window watching the moon, different from Earth's moon, he'd noted, with unfamiliar surface features, and processed the implications. These ninja could create illusions, manipulate elements, move with enhanced speed, and perform what his world would call magic, but they treated as ordinary technique. And according to his observations, even children could do basic versions, which meant it wasn't genetic mutation like meta-humans. It was learned, trained, systematic, which meant he could learn it too. The question was whether they'd teach him or whether he'd have to steal the knowledge. On the 4th morning, Kakashi arrived with Tsunade and a third-person Batman hadn't seen before. A scarred man with a bandaged right arm and eye, walking with a cane but radiating authority that made even Tsunade seem less imposing. The man studied Batman with his visible eye, like examining an insect under glass. Tsunade spoke first, her tone formal. She gestured to the scarred man and said a name, Danzo. The name carried weight. The guards had straightened to attention when he entered, and Kakashi's relaxed posture had shifted to something more watchful. Danzo spoke, his voice rough and commanding. He gestured at Batman, then at the village, then made cutting motions and pointed to various directions. The message was clear even through the language barrier. You're a security risk. We should eliminate you or exile you to die in the wilderness. Tsunade responded sharply, her voice rising. She pointed at Batman's drawing of Earth's continents still visible on the wall, then made expansive gestures suggesting impossibility or incredible distance. He's from somewhere we can't even reach. He's not a spy. Danzo's response was cold. He made a throat-cutting gesture again, then pointed at his own head and tapped it meaningfully. Even if he's not a spy now, he's seen too much. He knows too much. The argument continued, and Batman watched the power dynamics. Tsunade had final authority, but Danzo clearly commanded significant influence. Kakashi stayed silent, his visible eye moving between speakers, reading the situation like Batman would read crime scene evidence. Finally, Tsunade made a sharp gesture that ended the discussion. She turned to Batman and spoke slowly, combining words with gestures he'd learned. Stay, learn language, then talk, then decide. She was buying him time, or buying herself time to make a decision that wouldn't spark internal conflict. Danzo's visible eye fixed on Batman with open hostility. He said something final and threatening, then turned and left with movements that seemed spry despite the cane. Another deception, Batman noted. The man wasn't as physically limited as he appeared. When Danzo was gone, Tsunade's shoulders dropped slightly. She spoke to Kakashi in a tired voice, then addressed Batman directly with something that sounded almost apologetic. Kakashi stepped forward and made a teaching gesture, pointing at himself, at Batman, at his mouth and ears. He was offering to accelerate the language lessons. Batman nodded acceptance immediately. What followed over the next week was the most intensive learning experience Bruce Wayne had undergone since training with the League of Assassins. Kakashi proved to be a patient but exacting teacher, drilling vocabulary and grammar with the same precision he probably trained combat techniques. 4 hours every morning, 3 hours every evening, with homework assignments that Batman completed by candlelight after Kakashi left. Bruce's eidetic memory and linguistic training made progress rapid. By day 6, he could form basic sentences. By day 10, he could hold simple conversations. "Why teach me?" Batman asked in halting but comprehensible Japanese. That's what the language was, he'd finally determined, though with dialectical variations he didn't recognize. Kakashi looked up from the book he'd been reading. He always brought something to read during their sessions. "Tsunade-sama's orders. But why do you follow them? You think I'm dangerous. I think you're fascinating." Kakashi's visible eye crinkled with amusement. A man who appears from nowhere, fights 4 ANBU operatives without chakra, carries technology we don't understand, and draws maps of continents that don't exist. You're either the best infiltrator I've ever seen or genuinely from somewhere else. Either way, you're worth understanding before killing. The casual mention of killing didn't escape Batman's notice. And if Danzo decides not to wait for understanding, then you'll find out why I'm called the Copy Ninja. Kakashi turned a page without looking up. Though I'd prefer not to kill someone who's been such an attentive student. You learned more in 10 days than most academy students manage in months. I'm motivated. Fear is an excellent motivator. Kakashi finally looked at him directly. But I don't think it's fear driving you. You want to understand this world? Why? Batman considered how much to reveal. In my world, understanding is survival. Knowledge is power. And I've built everything on being prepared. Everything? That's an interesting word choice. Kakashi closed his book. What exactly did you build, Batman-san? The honorific was new. A sign of growing respect or just politeness? A mission, Batman said carefully. A purpose. And now I'm cut off from it. Missions can be found anywhere. Kakashi stood, stretching. Perhaps that's what Tsunade-sama sees in you. Someone who could serve a purpose here. As what? A reshapes, curiosity? A weapon? As an ally. Kakashi moved to the window, looking out at the village. Konoha has enemies, Batman-san. We've recently lost our third Hokage. Our Jinchuriki has left for training. One of our most promising young ninja has defected to a traitor. We're vulnerable, and everyone knows it. Batman processed the unfamiliar terms, Hokage, Jinchuriki, but caught the essential message. This village was in crisis. And you think I can help with that? I think you fought 4 INBU without Chakra and gave them enough trouble that they had to resort to Genjutsu to capture you. Kakashi turned back to face him. Once you learn to use Chakra, if you can learn, you'll be formidable. There it was, the offer wrapped in observation. This Chakra, the energy I saw you generate, can anyone learn it? Anyone born in this world has Chakra. Kakashi tilted his head. You're an interesting test case. No one's ever tried to teach someone from another dimension before. I want to learn. I know, but that's not my decision. Kakashi moved to the door, then paused. Tomorrow, Tsunade-sama will interview you properly. With language no longer a barrier, she'll want real answers. About where you came from, what you are, what you want. And if my answers don't satisfy her, then Danzo gets what he wants. Kakashi's eye met his directly. So I suggest you think carefully about what you're willing to reveal and what you're not. Tsunade-sama values honesty, but she values Konoha's security more. After Kakashi left, Batman spent the night preparing. Not escape plans. He'd already mapped 17 exit routes from this building and dismissed them all as too likely to trigger a response that would end with his death. No, he prepared for the most dangerous kind of combat. The truth. How much could he reveal without compromising himself? Without giving them leverage? Without making himself so valuable that they'd never let him leave? Or so dangerous that they'd eliminate him preemptively? By dawn, he'd made his decisions. When Tsunade arrived with Kakashi and Sakura as translator backup, Batman was ready. Tsunade sat across from him at the small table, her hands folded, her expression unreadable. Batman-san, I am told you can now communicate adequately. Is this correct? Yes, Hokage-sama. He'd learned the proper honorific and the political structure. Hokage meant village leader, equivalent to a combination of mayor, general, and head of state. Good. Then let's begin with a simple question. Her eyes were hard. What are you? Human. No superhuman abilities. No genetic mutations. He'd prepared this carefully. In my world, I am what you would call a detective. Someone who investigates crimes and stops criminals. Without chakra? Without jutsu? Sakura sounded skeptical. Without whatever those terms mean, yes. In my world, not everyone has special abilities. Those who do are rare and called metahumans or aliens. I am neither. Tsunade absorbed this. And this world you come from. Explain. Batman pulled out the drawing he'd refined over the past week, not just continents, but rough political boundaries, major cities, technological indicators. My world has nations like yours, but they're connected by advanced technology. We have machines that fly, that communicate across continents instantly, that process information faster than human thought. He pulled out another drawing, a simplified schematic of a computer. This is a device that thinks in numbers. It can store thousands of books, display images, send messages around the world in seconds. All three were staring at the schematic, like he'd drawn alien hieroglyphics. Impossible, Sakura breathed. A machine that thinks? Not thinks like humans, calculates, follows instructions, but yes, it processes information. Batman met Tsunade's eyes. My world is built on technology where yours is built on chakra. Different foundations, same goal, advancing civilization. And you created the armor you wore? The devices in your belt? Kakashi leaned forward with interest. Yes, and much more. Buildings full of equipment, vehicles, weapons, information networks. Batman gestured to himself. This is nothing compared to what I had access to. Tsunade's expression had shifted from suspicion to calculation. If you're so advanced, why do you look human? No modifications, no enhancements. Because I chose not to. This was important. In my world, I could have gained powers through various means: genetic modification, magical artifacts, alien technology. I chose not to. I chose to prove that a human being with enough training, enough preparation, enough will could stand alongside those with powers. Why? Tsunade's question was simple but cut to the core. Batman considered his answer carefully. The truth, but not all of it. Because when I was 8 years old, I watched my parents murdered in front of me. The killer was human, just human, and I decided that night that no one should ever feel that helpless again. I spent years training, learning, preparing. I became a symbol, something criminals would fear, something victims could hope for. Silence filled the room. Even Kakashi's casual posture had stilled. And then you arrived here, Tsunade said quietly. Cut off from everything you built, unable to continue your mission. Yes. So what do you want now? This was the critical moment. Batman held her gaze. 3 things. First, to learn your language and customs well enough to survive. Second, to understand if it's possible to return to my world. Third, to decide what my purpose is if return is impossible. And if we can't help with any of that. Tsunade's voice was hard again. If we decide you're too dangerous to keep alive, then you'll have to kill me. Batman's voice was flat. But you should know, I've survived assassination attempts by the world's deadliest organizations. I've escaped death traps, designed by genius psychopaths. I've fought gods and lived. I don't say that as a threat. I say it so you understand. I am very, very difficult to kill. Kakashi actually laughed. I'm starting to like you, Batman-san. Tsunade shot him a withering look, then returned her attention to Batman. You say you want to learn our ways. Does that include chakra? If I can, yes. Why? Because I watched your ninja create illusions that bypassed my mental defenses. I watched earth and fire and lightning manipulated with hand gestures. I watched people move at speeds that should be impossible. Batman leaned forward. In my world, I survived by understanding every threat, every advantage, every technique my enemies used. Here I'm blind, vulnerable. That's unacceptable. Tsunade studied him for a long moment, then made a decision. Kakashi, test him. Test him? Kakashi raised an eyebrow. For chakra capacity, I want to know if someone from another dimension even has chakra, and if so, how much? Kakashi stood and approached Batman. "This won't hurt, but it might feel strange. Hold out your hand." Batman extended his arm. Kakashi placed 2 fingers against his wrist, closed his visible eye, and concentrated. The seconds stretched. Finally, Kakashi's eye opened, and his expression was unreadable. "Tsunade-sama, you should feel this yourself." The Hokage stood and repeated the process, her fingers against Batman's wrist, her eyes closed. When she opened them, she looked shaken. "What is it?" Batman demanded. Tsunade and Kakashi exchanged glances. Finally, the Hokage spoke. "You have chakra, substantial reserves actually, but it's completely untrained, completely unformed, like..." She struggled for the comparison. "Like finding an ocean that's never flowed, power with no channels, no pathways, no control." "Is that unusual?" "Everyone develops their chakra pathways naturally through growth," Sakura explained. "By your age, they should be fully formed even if untrained. But yours, it's like they were never activated at all." "What does that mean?" Batman pressed. Kakashi answered. "It means if we can teach you to actually use your chakra, you'll have capacity comparable to a Jonin, possibly higher. But it also means training. You will be like teaching an infant to walk when they have the muscle mass of an adult. Difficult, potentially dangerous." Tsunade sat back down heavily. "This changes things." "How?" Batman asked. "Because now you're not just a curiosity from another world." The Hokage's eyes were calculating again. "You're a potential asset with enormous untapped power, which makes you valuable, which makes you a target." "Danzo," Batman said flatly, "among others." Tsunade drummed her fingers on the table. "If I authorize chakra training for you, it won't stay secret. Root will know. Other villages will eventually know. You'll become a prize, someone to recruit or eliminate." "Then don't authorize it publicly," Batman said. "Teach me in secret. Let everyone think I'm just a technological curiosity you're studying." "And when you eventually display chakra abilities?" "By then, I'll be strong enough to defend myself." Batman's voice was certain. "And you'll know whether I'm worth the investment." Tsunade studied him for a long moment. Then she turned to Kakashi. "Your assessment?" "He's dangerous, brilliant, paranoid, probably unstable by our standards." Kakashi's eye crinkled. "He'll fit right in." Despite herself, Tsunade almost smiled. Then her expression hardened. "Batman-san, I'm going to make you an offer. One time only. Refuse, and we go back to you being a detained anomaly until we decide what to do with you." "I'm listening." "I will authorize Kakashi to teach you chakra control in secret. In exchange, you will provide us with knowledge of your world's technology, anything that could be adapted to our purposes. You will also use those detective skills you claim to have in service to Konoha, and..." Her voice became steel. "You will not kill. I understand that may be customary in your world. But here, as my operative, you will follow our rules." Batman almost laughed. Of all the demands she could have made, she'd chosen the one that aligned perfectly with his code. "I never kill, ever. That's not your rule, it's mine." All three looked surprised. "Even when fighting for your life?" Sakura asked. "Especially then. I've had 10,000 opportunities to kill, 10,000 justifications. I never have. I never will." Kakashi's visible eye had gone serious. "That's unusual for someone in your line of work. That's what makes me different from the criminals I hunt." Batman met Tsunade's gaze. "Do we have an agreement?" The Hokage extended her hand across the table. "We have an agreement. Welcome to Konoha, Batman-san. Try not to make me regret this." Batman shook her hand, feeling the strength in her grip. He'd gained an ally, a teacher, and a purpose. Now he just had to survive long enough to learn this world's secrets and figure out if Danzo would accept Tsunade's decision or try to eliminate the problem independently. The training began in the dead of night in a sealed underground chamber deep beneath the Hokage Tower. The room was bare stone, lit by flickering torches that cast long, dancing shadows. A setting that felt more at home in the Batcave than anything Batman had seen in Konoha so far. Kakashi stood opposite him, his usual book absent, both hands visible and posture all business. "First lesson," Kakashi said, his voice echoing slightly in the chamber. "Chakra is not magic. It's a combination of two energies: physical energy, drawn from every cell in your body, and spiritual energy, born of consciousness and will. Mix them and you create chakra. Mold it and you perform jutsu." Batman listened, cataloging. A scientific framework, albeit one his world's physics couldn't explain. The hand signs are the molding process. They're a focusing mechanism, a language the body understands to shape chakra for specific effects. Masters can sometimes bypass them, but for you, they'll be essential. Kakashi demonstrated, moving through the 12 basic signs slowly. Tiger, boar, ox, hare. These are the foundation. You must memorize them until they're muscle memory, faster than thought. For the next hour, Batman repeated the gestures under Kakashi's critical eye. His hands, trained for decades in precise combat movements and delicate forensic work, adapted quickly. The signs felt unnatural, almost ceremonial, but he pushed through the dissonance. "Good. Now sit." Kakashi gestured to the stone floor. "Close your eyes. I want you to search inward, to feel your own energy. Don't try to control it yet. Just listen." Bruce sat, cross-legged, and shut out the world. He'd practiced meditation with Tibetan monks, with Hindu ascetics, with the League of Assassins. He knew how to still his mind. But this was different. Instead of seeking emptiness, he was searching for a sensation he'd never known existed. Minutes passed. He heard the drip of water somewhere, the crackle of torchlight, felt the cool stone beneath him. Then a faint vibration, not sound, not touch. A resonance deep in his core, like a second heartbeat made of static. He focused on it. "I feel something," Batman said, eyes still closed. "A low hum in my abdomen." Kakashi's voice was approving. "That's your chakra coil system. The hub is there, in what we call the stomach's chakra pathway. Now try to gently pull a thread of that energy upward, toward your hand." Bruce visualized it. A cord of light, drawn from that reservoir, climbing through his body. He willed it to move. Nothing happened. He pushed harder, straining mentally. The hum intensified, buzzing uncomfortably, but remained anchored. "You're trying to command it," Kakashi observed. "Don't. You're not its master, you're its conduit. Invite it. Guide it." It was a subtle but profound shift in mindset. Bruce relaxed his mental grip, imagining the energy flowing like water through a channel he provided. Slowly, a warmth bloomed in his chest, then traveled down his arm. He opened his eyes, looking at his palm. A faint, shimmering blue light danced just above his skin, flickering like a dying candle. It lasted only 3 seconds before sputtering out. Exhaustion hit him like a physical blow. He sagged, catching himself on his hands, breathing heavily. His limbs felt leaden, his mind fogged. "Chakra exhaustion," Kakashi said, not unkindly. "You just used more mental energy to move that tiny amount than a genin uses for a full jutsu. Your pathways are there and the reservoir is vast, but the pipes are narrow and rusty. They've never been used." Bruce gritted his teeth. pushing himself back upright. How long to make them functional? For basic control? Weeks. For combat applications? Months. For true mastery? Kakashi shrugged. Years, assuming you survive the process. We don't have years. Danzo won't wait that long. Probably not. Kakashi's eye grew serious. Which is why, alongside chakra training, you're going to learn other ways to survive here, starting with how not to get caught in a genjutsu. Over the next several nights, the routine solidified. 2 hours of chakra control exercises, moving minuscule amounts of energy, holding it, releasing it. Progress was agonizingly slow, measurable in millimeters of light and seconds of sustained glow. The frustration was a familiar enemy. Bruce channeled it into relentless repetition. The rest of their time was devoted to what Kakashi called Shinobi fundamentals for dimensional travelers. It was a crash course in the realities of this world. Kakashi taught him the 3 main jutsu categories: ninjutsu, technique-based, like the fireball; taijutsu, physical combat, which Batman already excelled at; and genjutsu, illusions. It was the last that was Batman's most glaring vulnerability. Genjutsu works by injecting chakra into your opponent's nervous system, hijacking their senses, Kakashi explained one night, demonstrating by making a simple flower appear in his hand before letting it vanish. Without chakra control of your own, you have no way to sense the intrusion or disrupt it. You're completely helpless. Countermeasures? Batman asked, already brainstorming solutions from first principles. The standard method is to disrupt your own chakra flow. A sudden shock to the system breaks the illusion. You can't do that yet. So we work on prevention and indirect defense. Kakashi's lessons were brutal and practical. He taught Batman to recognize the subtle signs of a genjutsu cast. A momentary haze in the air, a specific hand sign sequence, an unnatural stillness in the environment. He drilled him on environmental awareness exercises, forcing Bruce to maintain a hyper-vigilant mental map of his surroundings at all times, so any alteration would trigger immediate suspicion. Your mind is your best weapon, Kakashi said after a particularly grueling session where he trapped Batman in a looping illusion of the Gotham skyline for 10 minutes. Illusions rely on you accepting the false reality. If you constantly question everything you perceive, you create mental friction that can slow the illusion's hold. It was a strategy of paranoid defiance, and it suited Batman perfectly. During the days, he was no longer confined to his cell. Tsunade had given him limited, escorted movement, always with at least one ANBU shadowing him, ostensibly to study Konoha's architecture. In reality, it was his first real intelligence-gathering operation. He walked the streets, a towering, armored figure drawing stares from civilians, and curious, assessing glances from ninja. He memorized patrol routes, guard rotations, the location of armories and communications posts. He identified key infrastructure points and estimated population density. He observed the social hierarchy, how Jonin commanded respect, how Chunin managed squads, how Genin struggled to keep up. He also saw the village's wounds, scorch marks on buildings not yet repaired from the recent invasion, memorial stones with fresh flowers, a tangible tension in the air, a collective flinch at sudden loud noises. Konoha was a patient out of surgery, healing but still fragile. It was on one of these escorted walks near the training grounds that he had his first non-hostile encounter with Konoha's younger generation. A boy with bright blonde hair and whisker-like marks on his cheeks, the Jinchuriki Kakashi had mentioned, Naruto Uzumaki, was gone for training, but his friends remained. The trio, a blonde girl named Ino, a quiet boy with a ponytail called Shikamaru, and a large boy named Choji, watched him from a distance with open curiosity. Shikamaru, in particular, watched with an analytical sharpness that reminded Bruce of a younger Tim Drake. "You're the other-worlder," Shikamaru stated as Batman's escort paused to speak with a Chunin. The boy's voice was lazy, but his eyes were alert. "The one who fights without chakra." "I am," Batman replied, keeping his tone neutral. "Troublesome," Shikamaru sighed. "You've upset a lot of people's plans just by existing. Danzo-sama's faction is arguing for your dissection. The civilian council wants you exiled as a bad omen." Bruce filed the information away. Multiple internal factions with differing agendas. "And what do you think?" "I think you're a variable." Shikamaru shrugged. "Variables are annoying, but they can also change games that have become stale." He gave Batman a long look. "Just don't change the game in a way that gets my friends killed. That would be troublesome." It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of priority, and Bruce respected it. He gave a slight nod. The boy returned it before shooing his friends away. The encounter was a ripple. The next day, Danzo himself appeared during Batman's lesson with Kakashi in the underground chamber. He entered without knocking, his single eye sweeping the room before landing on Bruce, who was sweating through another attempt to sustain a chakra glow in his palm. "Hokage-sama's pet project," Danzo said, his voice like dry leaves crumbling. "I see you are wasting Kakashi's valuable time." "Lord Danzo," Kakashi said, his tone perfectly polite and utterly empty. "To what do we owe the inspection?" "Merely ensuring our village's secrets are not being squandered on a lost cause." Danzo stepped closer, his gaze boring into Batman. "The progress is negligible. He is a drain on resources and a security risk of the highest order. My route could extract everything useful from his mind in a matter of hours." "Torture is an unreliable method of extracting accurate technical information," Batman said flatly, letting the chakra in his hand fade. He met Danzo's gaze. "It yields what the victim thinks you want to hear, not what you need to know." Danzo's eye narrowed. "You speak from experience?" "I've resisted it, and I've seen its results fail catastrophically." Batman stood, facing the older man. "Tsunade-sama's method will yield working schematics, understood principles, and potential innovations. Your method would yield screams, confessions, and useless diagrams drawn under duress." The air in the chamber grew cold. Kakashi had gone very still. "You presume to understand our methods, outsider?" Danzo's chakra leaked out for a moment, a dark, oppressive pressure that made the torches gutter. Batman didn't flinch. He'd stood in the presence of Darkseid. "I understand efficiency, and wasting a unique intelligence asset because of paranoia is inefficient." For a long moment, Danzo said nothing. Then a thin, unpleasant smile touched his lips. "You have spirit. A shame it is allied with Tsunade's sentimentalities. Should you ever seek a patron who understands the necessities of true power, my door is open. The offer, of course, expires once you are deemed more liability than asset." With that, he turned and left, his cane tapping a sharp rhythm on the stone floor. Kakashi let out a slow breath when the sound faded. That was either very brave or very stupid. "It was necessary," Batman said, sitting back down. "He needed to see I'm not intimidated, that I'm an actor, not a resource to be harvested. He also now sees you as a potential rival, not just a curiosity. That makes you more dangerous in his eyes." Kakashi rubbed his visible eye. "Your training just became urgent. We need to accelerate your timeline." "How?" "By moving beyond theory. Kakashi's expression turned grim. "Tomorrow night, we leave the village. There's a place I know, a natural chakra convergence point in the forest of death. The ambient energy there might force your pathways open. It's risky. It could overwhelm you and burn out your system entirely. But if it works, you'll gain months of progress in a single night. The risk of death? Significant. The risk of remaining helpless against Danzo? Certain." Kakashi watched him. "Your choice." Bruce thought of the scarred man's cold eyes, the implied threat, the political pressure building against Tsunade. He thought of the genjutsu that had dropped him without a fight. He thought of his mission, stranded though it was. There was no choice. "We go tomorrow," Batman said. That night, alone in his assigned quarters, an upgrade from the cell, but still monitored, Bruce didn't sleep. He used a stolen piece of charcoal and a scrap of paper to sketch not technology, but a map of Konoha's power structure as he understood it. Tsunade's faction, Danzo's route, the civilian council, the various clan heads. He noted tensions, alliances, and vulnerabilities. He was not a citizen of this village. He was not a ninja. But he was a strategist in a hostile environment, and he would not be a pawn in someone else's game. As dawn approached, he looked at the faint, stubborn flicker of blue light he could now conjure in his palm for a full 10 seconds. It was a start. Tomorrow, he would gamble his life to accelerate it. He had survived falling through dimensions. He would survive this. The forest of death earned its name. Even at night, the air hung thick with the scent of decay and primal growth. Vegetation grew in twisted, aggressive tangles, and the sounds were wrong. The chirps of insects too rhythmic, the hoots of predators too intelligent. The moonlight filtering through the dense canopy painted everything in fractured silver and deep shadow. Kakashi moved ahead of him, silent as a ghost, his figure blending into the darkness in a way that had nothing to do with Batman's theatrical stealth. This was environmental assimilation, a product of chakra-enhanced movement and decades of training. Bruce followed, relying on his own honed skills, but he was acutely aware of the gap between them. Here, Kakashi was a native predator. Batman was an intruder. "The convergence point is ahead," Kakashi whispered, stopping before a sheer rock face covered in phosphorescent moss. "It's a natural cave system. The energy inside is dense. You'll feel it immediately. Your job is to not fight it. Let it flow into you, then guide it through the pathways we've been practicing. Fighting it will tear you apart." Batman nodded, his senses already prickling. The hum he'd learned to associate with his own chakra was now a dull roar emanating from the rock, like standing near a subterranean waterfall. Kakashi performed a sequence of hand signs: rat, tiger, dog. Batman recognized them now, and a section of the rock face shimmered and dissolved, revealing a dark entrance. A basic concealment barrier. The cave's natural energy would fray anything more complex. Ready? Yes. They entered. The air inside was cooler, charged with static that made the hairs on Bruce's arms stand up. The walls were smooth stone, embedded with crystalline formations that pulsed with a soft inner light. The cave opened into a large chamber where a pool of perfectly clear water reflected the glowing ceiling. In the center of the pool stood a stone dais. "There," Kakashi pointed. "Sit. I'll maintain the entrance barrier and keep watch. What happens next is between you and the chakra." Bruce waded through the shallow, icy water and climbed onto the dais. The moment he settled into a meditative posture, the world shifted. It was as if he'd been deaf his entire life and could now hear. The low hum became a symphony of power, vibrant, chaotic, and immense. Ambient chakra didn't just surround him. It pressed against his skin, seeped into his lungs with every breath, resonated in his bones. The untapped reservoir within him, which had felt like a still ocean, began to churn in response, waves crashing against shores that had never known tide. Let it flow in. He remembered Kakashi's warning. He forced his instincts to control, to wall off, to defend, to quiet. He visualized his pathways not as closed pipes, but as dry riverbeds, waiting for the rain. The energy needed no further invitation. It flooded in. A white-hot torrent of sensation ripped through him. It was not pain, but something more fundamental. An overwhelming fullness, as if every cell were being inflated. The neat, orderly map of his nervous system he'd built through years of biofeedback training dissolved into a storm of light and noise. He saw memories flash, the pearls hitting the alley pavement, the endless training, the Batman symbol projected onto clouds. But they were distorted, washed in the blue glow of this alien energy. His focus shattered. He was drowning in the raw, unrefined power of another world. Guided. Kakashi's voice was a distant echo in the maelstrom. You are the conduit. Bruce clawed his way back to awareness. He couldn't control the flood, but he could try to channel it. He focused on the first, simplest pathway Kakashi had taught him. From the stomach's coil, up the spine, down the right arm, to the palm. He didn't command the chakra. He remembered the route and offered it as the path of least resistance. The raging energy seized the offer. It surged through the narrow, unused channel like a fire hose through a straw. A scream tore from Batman's throat, raw and involuntary, as agony lit up every nerve in his arm. The skin of his palm glowed not with a faint candle flicker, but with the brilliance of a welding torch. He could see the bones silhouetted in the light. The air crackled, and the water around the dais began to steam. He was burning from the inside out. Stop. His survival instinct screamed. Seal it off. But stopping meant failure. Failure meant remaining vulnerable. It meant Danzo winning. It meant betraying the purpose that had driven him across universes. He held on. Through the pain, his analytical mind fought for purchase. The energy was following the pathway, but wildly, destructively. It needed refinement, molding. He recalled the hand signs, not as physical gestures, but as mental shapes, as concepts of containment and direction. In the prison of his own burning nerves, he began to form them in his mind. Tiger, strength, containment. Boar, resilience, flow. Ox, foundation, stability. With each mental sign, the torrent rushing down his arm began to coalesce. The blinding, chaotic light compressed, intensifying in his palm into a dense, spinning sphere of blue-white energy. The pain didn't lessen, but it transformed from a chaotic burn into a focused, unbearable pressure, like holding a star in his hand. He couldn't sustain it. With a final mental effort, he visualized releasing the seal. The energy blast that erupted from his palm was utterly silent. A beam of concentrated chakra, crude and unfocused, lanced across the chamber and struck the far wall. The effect was not explosive. The crystalline rock didn't shatter, it dissolved. A perfect cylindrical tunnel 2 feet in diameter was bored straight through 10 feet of solid stone, leaving edges as smooth as glass. The beam continued into the darkness beyond, its light vanishing into the distance. The recoil threw Batman backward off the dais into the pool. The connection to the ambient chakra snapped. The overwhelming pressure vanished, leaving behind a void of sensation so complete it was nauseating. He floated in the cold water, gasping, his right arm completely numb, throbbing with a deep, bone-deep ache. The glow in the cave crystals seemed dimmer, as if he'd drained a fraction of their light. Kakashi was at his side in an instant, hauling him out of the water. The Jonin's visible eye was wide with something between alarm and awe. He examined Batman's arm, his fingers probing gently. The pathway is scorched, severely strained, but it's intact. You didn't burn it out? He looked at the perfectly smooth tunnel in the wall, then back at Bruce. What did you do? I molded it, Batman rasped, his voice hoarse. Mentally, the hand signs. I couldn't move my fingers. Kakashi stared at him. You performed jutsu shaping through pure visualization on your first true chakra contact, while under a natural energy assault? He let out a low whistle. No wonder it nearly killed you, and no wonder it worked. He helped Bruce sit up. You forced open a major pathway. It will take weeks to heal fully, and you'll need to rebuild it with careful exercise. But the barrier is broken. You can now channel meaningful amounts of chakra. Bruce flexed the fingers of his right hand. They responded sluggishly, needles of pain shooting up his arm. But beneath the pain, he felt it. A new current, a steady, powerful flow where before there had been only a trickle. It was raw and painful to touch, but it was there. Can I use it? He asked. For the next 48 hours, any attempt will likely rupture the pathway and cripple your arm permanently, Kakashi said bluntly. After that, for simple augmentation, maybe. For another blast like that. He glanced at the tunnel. Not without months of training to refine the control. What you did was the equivalent of using a volcanic eruption to light a candle. Impressive, but impractical. It was a setback, but it was also progress. He had the key. Now he needed the skill. As Kakashi helped him to his feet, a sharp, metallic ping echoed in the chamber. Something small and fast ricocheted off the stone where Batman's head had been a second before and clattered into the water. A senbon needle. Poisoned, likely. Kakashi shoved Batman behind the dais as a volley of needles peppered the stone. We're not alone. 4 figures dropped from the cavern roof, landing silently in the water. They wore masks, but not Anbu's animal designs. These were blank, emotionless white ovals. Root. The Hokage's experiment has ventured outside her protection, one of them stated, his voice flat and dead. A training accident in the forest of death is tragically common, even for outsiders. Kakashi stepped forward, his hands in his pockets, his posture deceptively relaxed. Danzo-sama moves quickly, and foolishly, attacking a Jonin in Konoha territory is an act of treason. You are aiding a security threat. Your actions are the treason. Eliminate them both. The root operatives moved as one. 2 charged Kakashi, their movements a blur. The other 2 flanked wide, aiming for Batman. Bruce's mind, fogged by chakra exhaustion and pain, snapped into combat clarity. He was injured, his primary new weapon unusable. Facing opponents who could use abilities he still barely understood. He had his training, his wits, and a cave full of environmental hazards. As the first root ninja closed, hands already forming signs, Batman didn't try to match speed. He analyzed the environment. The water was shallow, the ground was slick stone. The glowing crystals provided uneven light. The ninja finished his signs: bird, snake, ram, and a jet of pressurized water shot from his mouth. Batman dove sideways, the water cutter slicing through the spot where he'd stood and scarring the wall. He came up behind the dais, his eyes on the operative's feet. The man was standing in 6 inches of water. Bruce's left hand dipped into his belt, not his utility belt, but a simple pouch Kakashi had procured for him, containing basic shinobi tools. His fingers closed around a handful of caltrops. He threw them not at the ninja, but at the water surface in front of him. The root operative, already advancing for another jutsu, didn't see the scattered metal. His foot came down on a caltrop. It wasn't enough to penetrate his boot, but it was an unexpected, uneven surface. His balance faltered for a microsecond. That was all Batman needed. He surged forward, not with superhuman speed, but with perfect timing. He grabbed the man's leading arm, used his own momentum against him, and executed a brutal judo throw. The ninja slammed, water disoriented. Before he could rise, Batman was on him, driving a knee into his diaphragm to drive the air from his lungs, then delivering a precise nerve strike to the side of the neck. The man went limp. The second operative was already upon him, kunai flashing. Batman parried with a reinforced forearm guard, the metal screeching. He couldn't match the speed of the Chakra-enhanced strikes, so he didn't try. He closed the distance, moving inside the kunai's effective range, and turned the fight into a brutal clinch. Elbows, knees, short, sharp strikes to pressure points. It was dirty, close-quarters fighting, the kind that favored his style over the ninja's fluid, weapon-based techniques. He took a shallow cut across his ribs for his trouble, but he landed 3 solid blows to the ninja's temple in rapid succession. The operative staggered back, his mask cracked. A glance showed Kakashi handling his 2 opponents with terrifying efficiency, his movements a blend of taijutsu and subtle, low-cost ninjutsu, displacing water to blind one, using a substitution to appear behind the other. The rude operative Batman had stunned shook his head, rising. He formed a hand sign, a single one, Ram, a genjutsu. Batman felt the familiar, terrifying haze at the edges of his vision. The cave walls began to warp. He had no chakra control to break it, but he had Kakashi's lessons. Question everything. The water at his feet was supposed to be still. In the false reality, it rippled from a non-existent breeze. The pain in his arm was a constant. In the genjutsu, it flickered. The inconsistencies were tiny, but they were there. He latched onto them, focusing on the wrongness, refusing to accept the illusion. The genjutsu fractured, crumbling like broken glass. The operative's eyes widened in shock behind his mask. That moment of surprise was fatal. Kakashi appeared behind him in a swirl of leaves, a kunai pressed to his throat. Drop the jutsu. Calls off your partner. The remaining operative, seeing the situation, froze. Danzo-sama will not be pleased, the captured root agent hissed. Danzo-sama overplayed his hand, Kakashi said softly, dangerously. Now, you will return to him with a message. The asset is under the Hokage's protection. Further interference will be treated as a direct challenge to her authority. And I will personally deliver the bodies of any root operatives I find near him. Do you understand? A tense silence hung in the cave. Finally, the captured agent gave a sharp nod. Kakashi released him. The 2 conscious root ninja collected their stunned comrades and vanished into the shadows with the same eerie silence with which they'd arrived. The cave was suddenly, profoundly quiet, save for the drip of water and Batman's ragged breathing. Kakashi turned to him, assessing. The cut on his ribs, the trembling of his injured arm, the exhaustion in his stance. You held them off. With no chakra, using terrain and basic tools. They were trying to capture, not kill. Batman gritted out, applying pressure to his wound. The first one could have used lethal ninjutsu. He used a water cutter, aimed to disable. Danzo still wants what's in my head. Perhaps, but he now knows you're not a helpless prisoner. And he knows you're learning. Kakashi's expression was grim. The stakes just escalated. This was a probe. Next time, it will be an execution squad. Bruce looked at his right hand, the pathway within still screaming in pain, but now thrumming with latent power. He looked at the smooth, glassy tunnel his uncontrolled blast had carved through solid rock. He had taken the first, painful, explosive step into this world's power system. He had survived his first real political attack, and he had drawn a line in the sand. Danzo saw a tool or a threat. Tsunade saw an asset or a risk. But Batman saw something else. A new battlefield, with new rules to master and shadows that needed a different kind of fear. "Let's go back," Batman said, pushing himself upright. "We have work to do." The journey back to Konoha was a slow, painful trek. Every jostle sent fire lancing up Batman's damaged arm, and the cut on his ribs, though shallow, burned with each breath. Kakashi offered no assistance beyond a watchful eye, forcing Bruce to rely on his own endurance. It was another test, Bruce knew, one of pain tolerance and operational readiness. They slipped back into the village just before dawn, using a little-known drainage access that Kakashi seemed familiar with. The Jonin left him at the door of his quarters with a final warning. "The healers will be here shortly. Don't mention the route. Tsunade will handle it. Rest. You've earned a day of it." Batman didn't rest. He cataloged his injuries, performed a self-suture on the cut with a sterilized needle and thread from his meager kit, and then sat at his small desk. He began to write, not in English, but in the phonetic script of this world that he was steadily mastering. He documented everything: the sensation of the chakra convergence, the mental process of molding, the physiological feedback of the overtaxed pathway, the combat tactics of the root operatives, their apparent hesitation to use lethal force. Analysis. Danzo's primary objective remains intelligence acquisition. Secondary objective: control. My developing abilities represent a variable outside his control, hence the shift to elimination. Conclusion: must accelerate utility to Tsunade's faction to maintain protective status. A soft knock interrupted his writing. It was Sakura, her medical kit in hand. Her eyes widened slightly at the sight of his stitched wound and the dark web-like bruising creeping up from his right wrist to his shoulder. "Kakashi-sensei said you had a training incident," he undersold it. "It was informative," Batman grunted as she began her examination. Her hands glowed with a gentle green light, medical ninjutsu. As the cool energy seeped into his arm, the deep, throbbing ache began to recede, replaced by a soothing numbness. "The chakra pathway is inflamed and micro-torn," she murmured, her focus complete. "You pushed far too much, far too fast. It will need daily treatment for a week, and no chakra use through it for at least 5 days." Understood. She worked in silence for a few minutes, the only sound the faint hum of her healing technique. "You know," she said quietly, not looking up, "when you first came, a lot of people thought you were just a strange-looking bandit, or maybe a missing nin from some distant, backwards country. But the things you ask about, the way you observe everything, you're trying to understand us, not just how to fight us, but how we work. Understanding is the first step to coexistence, or to victory," Batman replied. "I have no desire for victory against Konoha. But you don't desire to be part of it either, do you?" She met his eyes. "You're like Kakashi-sensei in that way. You stand apart. It makes people nervous." "It should." She finished with his arm and moved to the rib wound, her green energy closing the suture neatly and erasing the bruising. "There. The internal damage will take longer, but the worst is stabilized. Follow the rest instructions, or you'll undo all my work." After she left, Batman found he could indeed sleep, a black, dreamless void of exhaustion. He was awakened not by noise, but by a presence. His eyes snapped open to find Tsunade standing at the foot of his bed, arms crossed, her expression thunderous. Sunlight streamed through the window, It was late afternoon. "My office," she said, her voice clipped. "Now." 5 minutes later, Batman stood before the Hokage's desk. Kakashi was already there, leaning against a wall. The atmosphere was tense. "Root operatives." Tsunade began without preamble, slamming a file onto her desk. "In the forest of death, attacking a jonin and a person under my direct protection. Explain." "I believe Lord Danzo was concerned about the security risk of an outsider learning our secrets," Kakashi said mildly. "He took preventative measures. He committed treason." Tsunade's fist cracked the wood of her desk. "I am the Hokage. My authority on this matter is absolute." "Is it?" Batman spoke for the first time. Both sets of eyes turned to him. "You have the title, Hokage-sama. But does Danzo respect it? Or does he command enough loyalty within the ANBU, the Council, and his own root to act independently? Last night wasn't treason. It was a test of your actual power." The silence that followed was icy. Tsunade's gaze could have melted steel. "You are treading on very dangerous ground, outsider. I am assessing the political landscape of my current place of residence. My survival depends on it." Batman stepped forward, ignoring the protest from his ribs. "Danzo believes you are weak. The village is recovering. Your most powerful Jinchuriki is absent. A prodigy has defected. He sees an opportunity to shift the balance of power. I am merely a catalyst." Tsunade sank into her chair, the anger draining from her face, replaced by weary frustration. "You're not wrong. The council is split. The clans are watching. Every decision I make is second-guessed." She looked at Batman. "And now I have you. An opportunity and a liability. Kakashi tells me you forced open a chakra pathway last night. At significant cost. But you did it. And you fought off root agents while exhausted and injured." She steepled her fingers. "Danzo's attempt failed, which makes you look stronger and him look reckless. That's a political point for me. But it also means he can't afford to let you develop further. You've become a symbol." "Then let me be a useful one," Batman said. "You've asked for knowledge of my technology. That is a long-term project. Let me offer something immediate. You called me a detective. Put me to work." Tsunade raised an eyebrow. "Doing what?" "What you don't have enough ninja to do, or the right kind of ninja to do. Investigation, not of enemies beyond the walls, but of problems within them." He leaned on her desk. "The black market in Konoha must be thriving post-invasion. Missing supplies, weapons, secrets, internal corruption. Cold cases your overtaxed ANBU don't have time for. Let me find things your shinobi are not trained to look for." Kakashi chuckled. He has a point. We're soldiers, spies, and assassins. We're not investigators. Not like he seems to be. Tsunade considered for a long minute. "Very well. A trial. One case. I'll give you something the ANBU wrote off." She rummaged in a drawer and pulled out a thin file. 3 months ago, a shipment of medical-grade Chakra conductive steel vanished from a guarded warehouse near the western wall. No signs of forced entry, no traces of jutsu. The ANBU investigation concluded it was an inside job by someone with high-level clearance, but they hit a dead end. The case is cold. Find out what happened. Batman took the file. "Access? Kakashi will be your liaison. He can get you anywhere you need to go. But you operate quietly. Your existence is still not common knowledge, and I'd like to keep it that way." "Understood." As they left the office, Kakashi fell into step beside him. "Medical steel? Not the most exciting first case." "It's perfect," Batman said, already scanning the sparse report. High-value, specialized material. Requires insider knowledge. No obvious violence. This is about greed and opportunity, not ideology. It will have a trail. His first act was not to visit the warehouse. Instead, he had Kakashi take him to the village archives. He spent hours studying maps of Konoha's infrastructure, supply chain records, and guard rotation schedules for the relevant period. He cross-referenced personnel with access to the warehouse against known gambling debts, recent financial windfalls, and behavioral reports. In Gotham, he had the Bat computer to do this in seconds. Here, it was painstaking manual work. The next day, his arm still tender but functional, he visited the warehouse. It was a squat stone building, its seals for freshness and security now inactive. He walked the perimeter, then the interior, his eyes missing nothing. Kakashi watched, curious. The Anbiyu report says no signs of entry, Batman murmured, running a finger along the door jamb. And they're right, the door wasn't forced. He knelt, examining the floor near a large ventilation grate. But they only looked at human-sized entries. He pointed to the grate. Its screws were faintly scored, the marks fresh compared to the surrounding rust. The grate itself was just large enough to pass a small crate through. The theft didn't happen at night, during a guard change. It happened in daylight, piece by piece, over a week. Someone with clearance came in, took a small amount, passed it out through this grate to a collaborator outside, and logged the missing amount as wastage or recording error. Kakashi crouched beside him. A shinobi could have just used a storage scroll. Too risky. A high-level storage scroll large enough would be logged and noticed. This was slow, patient, and designed to look like an administrative loss, not a theft. Batman stood. The collaborator outside needed to be invisible. Someone who could linger near a secure warehouse without raising suspicion. A maintenance worker, Kakashi realized, for the drainage system. 2 hours of questioning later, they had a name. An older civilian maintenance man with a known fondness for high-stakes dice games and recent, inexplicably paid-off debts. Confronted in his tiny apartment by the imposing figure of Batman and the infamous copy, Ninja, he broke immediately, naming his inside contact. A mid-level logistics Chunin responsible for inventory audits. The Chunin, when they found him, was less compliant. He tried to run, then to fight. Kakashi disarmed him in 2 moves. Batman's interrogation was not physical. It was psychological. He laid out the entire scheme, step by step, deduced from timelines, financial records, and the man's own body language. He revealed the man's mistress in a nearby town, the hidden bank account, the plans to defect to the land of tea. How could you know all that? The man stammered, defeated. You left a story in the details, Batman said, his voice a low growl. You just didn't know you were writing it. The recovered steel was long gone, fenced through a network of intermediaries, but the thieves were in custody, and a corruption ring within the logistics cores was exposed. The entire investigation took 38 hours. When Batman placed the final report on Tsunad's desk, her eyebrows climbed toward her hairline. The Anbiyu spent 2 weeks on this and found nothing. They looked for a ninja. They looked for a grand theft. I looked for a greedy man cutting corners. Batman replied. Different paradigms. Tsunade leaned back, a genuine smile touching her lips for the first time in his presence. It seems your unique skills have immediate value, Batman-san. Consider your trial passed. You now have a mandate and a new problem. She pushed another, thicker file toward him. This one is more sensitive. For the last 6 months, there have been disappearances. Not shinobi. Civilians, 4 of them. All from different districts, no apparent connection. The military police investigated, found nothing. The families are getting restless. It's bad for morale. I need it solved, and solved quietly. Batman opened the file. 4 faces stared back. A baker, a tailor, a potter, a scribe. Ordinary people. Vanished, without a trace from a village surrounded by walls and guards. A cold, familiar dread settled in his stomach. This wasn't greed. This was something darker. I'll need to visit the last known locations, talk to the families. Kakashi will arrange it. And Batman. Tsunade's voice turned grave. This one feels different. Be careful. If the INBU and military police found nothing, it means whoever is behind this is either very lucky or very good. As they exited the tower, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows, Kakashi glanced at him. You look like you've seen this before. I have. In my city, when ordinary people vanish, it's rarely random. There's a pattern, a purpose. You just have to see it from a height others don't. He looked out over the bustling village, the peaceful facade. Something is hunting in Konoha, and it's not a wild animal. He had come to this world as a castaway, then a prisoner, then a student. Now, he had become what he always was, a hunter in the shadows. The game had just changed. The missing civilians were a thread, and he would pull it until the whole tapestry of whatever horror lay beneath unraveled. His arm still ached, a reminder of the new power burning within him, waiting to be tamed. But for this hunt, he wouldn't need chakra. He would need the older, colder skills of the Dark Knight. The bat had found his cave. Now, he had found his case. The home of the 4th victim, a scribe named Kenji, was a small, neat apartment above a calligraphy supply shop in the merchant's quarter. The air still smelled faintly of ink and paper. His widow, a woman with tired eyes named Hani, offered tea with hands that trembled. He was working late, she said, her voice a monotone of rehearsed grief. Copying land treaties for the Hokage's office. He often did. He said he'd be home by moon high. He never came. Batman moved through the apartment, his gaze missing nothing. Kakashi stood by the door, a silent observer. The room was orderly, but not obsessively so. A half-finished cup of cold tea sat on the desk, beside neat stacks of parchment. A single, high-quality inkstone. A rack of brushes, one lying separate, not cleaned properly. He left in a hurry, Batman noted, pointing to the brush. Or was interrupted. Hana nodded. The man from the Hokage's office came. Said there was an urgent amendment. Kenji grabbed his cloak and left. That was the last time I saw him. Batman's head tilted. The man from the Hokage's office. Did you know him? See his face? He wore an Anbu mask, a fox. I didn't ask questions. She said it as if it were the most natural thing in the world. To her, it was. Authority was not to be questioned. Batman and Kakashi exchanged a glance. An ANBU summoning a civilian scribe for late-night work was not impossible, but it was unusual. The pattern repeated at the other 3 locations. The baker was last seen being approached by an ANBU operative, described as wearing a boar mask, for a special catering order for a confidential meeting. The tailor was fetched by a bird-masked ANBU for urgent uniform repairs. The potter by a tiger mask for custom work. 4 different ANBU animal masks, 4 civilians with specialized non-combat skills. All vanished without a trace after being summoned by authority. Someone is impersonating ANBU, Kakashi stated flatly as they stood on a rooftop overlooking the quieting village that night. Using the trust and fear they command. Or it is ANBU, Batman countered, or a faction within it. Root. Kakashi breathed the word like a curse. It fits Danzo's profile, using civilians for something. Experiments, information extraction. Their skill sets are oddly specific: writing, baking, sewing, pottery. All crafts requiring precision and knowledge of materials. They're not fighters, they're makers, Kakashi realized. He's collecting artisans. But for what? And why make them vanish? If it's a conscription, he could just draft them quietly. The disappearances cause noise, which Danzo doesn't want. Batman's mind raced, piecing together the fragments. Impersonation or rogue ANBU. Specific civilian skill sets. Total disappearances. They're not just being taken. They're being taken somewhere they can't be found, for a purpose that requires their complete isolation. And the impersonation suggests the operation is unauthorized, even by Danzo's shadow standards. He'd use real root agents. So, a third party? Within the village? Or a predator using the chaos and the mask of INBU as perfect camouflage? Batman looked out at the darkening streets. We need to see the last place Kenji was supposedly summoned to. The Hokage's office annex for scribes. The annex was a quiet, single-story building near the administrative complex. At this hour, it was deserted. Batman didn't pick the lock. He had Kakashi use a simple genjutsu on the lone night watchman to make him see and hear nothing. Inside, Kenji's workspace was a cubicle among dozens. It was clean, organized, too clean. Batman ran a finger along the edge of the desk. It's been sanitized, but not perfectly. He knelt, examining the floorboards. There, almost invisible, was a tiny dried smear of a different color clay, trapped in the crack between two boards. Reddish, coarse, not from a scribe's inkstone. He carefully extracted it with tweezers from his kit, sealing it in a folded paper. Potter's clay from the third victim's workshop. Kakashi's visible eye narrowed. They were brought here, all of them? Or their materials were. This is a collection point, a staging ground. Batman's gaze swept the room. The abductions aren't happening at the victims' homes or workplaces. They're lured here, to a place of authority, where they go willingly. Then they're taken elsewhere. He moved to the back of the large room, to a supply closet. The lock was simple, but there were faint scuffs on the door frame at an unusual height. He opened it. Brooms, buckets, rolls of parchment. And at the back, the air smelled wrong. Faintly metallic, with a coppery tang beneath the dust. He pushed aside the supplies. The back wall of the closet was wooden paneling. He pressed along the seams. One panel gave slightly. A hidden door, poorly balanced. Kakashi. The Jonin was beside him in an instant. A few subtle hand signs and a pulse of chakra revealed hidden sealing formulas on the panel. Low level, designed to muffle sound and deter casual chakra sensing. Kakashi disabled them with a dismissive flick of his fingers. The panel swung inward on silent hinges, revealing a descending stone staircase. The air that wafted up was cold, damp, and carried the unmistakable scent of blood and fear. Without a word, Batman descended, Kakashi a shadow behind him. The staircase led to a tunnel, clearly old, pre-Konoha, perhaps part of some ancient network. But recent renovations were evident. New support beams, electrical wires snaking along the walls, a shocking sight in this world, and heavy doors with modern locks. They bypassed the first door, from behind which came the faint, rhythmic sound of a potter's wheel. The second door echoed with the sizzle of an oven and the smell of baking bread. The third, with the hum of a sewing machine. The fourth door was different. Reinforced steel, a viewing slit, and from within, a low, pained moan. Batman peered through the slit. The room was a laboratory, sterile, bright, with unnatural electric light. On a central table, under restraints, lay Kenji the scribe. He was pale, sweating, his eyes wide with terror. A figure in a white lab coat, its back to the door, was meticulously drawing a complex sealing formula directly onto the man's chest with a brush dipped in something dark and glistening. On a nearby trolley, tools gleamed: scalpels, bone saws, and vials of Chakra conductive medical steel, the very material from Batman's first case. But it was the figure at the far wall that froze the blood in Bruce's veins. Leaning against a cabinet, observing the procedure with detached interest, was a man with pale skin, purple markings around his eyes, and a smug, serpentine smile. Orochimaru. The Sanin-turned-traitor was inside Konoha, deep underground, operating a secret laboratory, abducting civilians, and apparently collaborating with someone with access to stolen materials and the audacity to impersonate Anbu. Kakashi saw it too. His breath hissed between his teeth. He made a sharp hand signal. Retreat. Now. Report. This was far beyond a simple crime. This was an existential threat. Orochimaru's presence meant a breach in Konoha's security so profound it shook the village's foundations. But as Batman began to pull back from the slit, Kenji's eyes, rolling in panic, locked onto his. The scribe saw the glint of the cowl in the darkness. A spark of desperate hope flared in his gaze. The man in the lab coat turned, following Kenji's line of sight. He wasn't wearing a mask. He was young, with sharp features and glasses, his expression one of annoyed curiosity that morphed into instant alarm. Batman recognized him from Tsunade's files. Yakushi Kabuto, Orochimaru's right hand. "Intruders!" Kabuto shouted, slamming a hand on a console. Alarms blared, a harsh, electronic shriek utterly alien to Konoha. The doors along the corridor hissed open. From the artisan workshops, figures emerged. Not civilians, but blank-faced, pale-skinned individuals with dead eyes. Edo Tensei? No. Simpler. Clones. Or puppets. From the laboratory, Orochimaru turned, his smile widening into something predatory. Well, well, what unexpected guests. Kakashi Hatake. And the dimensional curiosity, how fortuitous. Go! Kakashi yelled, shoving Batman back toward the stairs as he formed hand signs. Warn the Hokage. Lightning erupted from Kakashi's hand, the Chidori's scream filling the tunnel as he charged the oncoming puppets, tearing through them in a blaze of blue-white light. Batman didn't argue. His mission had changed. He was not equipped to fight a Sannin. Intelligence was the priority. He fled up the stairs as the sounds of explosive combat erupted below, Kakashi's lightning against Orochimaru's sinister, fluid techniques. He burst into the annex, startling the still genjutsu'd watchman. He had to get to Tsunade, but as he exploded onto the street, he found his path blocked. 3 figures stood silhouetted in the moonlight. Not puppets, not Root, Anbu, but their postures were wrong, too still, too coordinated, and their masks were familiar. Fox, boar, and bird, the impersonators. The master does not wish his work disturbed, the fox-masked one said, its voice a garbled, artificial rasp. They attacked not with ninjutsu, but with coordinated taijutsu, their movements mechanically perfect and blindingly fast. Batman ducked a punch that shattered the wall behind him, rolled under a kick, and came up throwing smoke pellets. The cloud billowed, but the operatives didn't cough, didn't stagger. They had filters, or didn't need to breathe. He fought defensively, analyzing. Their strength was superhuman, their coordination flawless. But they lacked adaptability. They followed patterns. He used it, baiting the boar-masked one into a charge, sidestepping at the last second and sending it crashing into its ally. But there were 3, and he was alone. His chakra pathway still too tender for the violent augmentation he desperately needed. A glancing blow from the fox mask cracked a rib plate in his suit. Another kick sent him skidding across the cobblestones. He scrambled up, his mind cold and clear. He couldn't win a stand-up fight. He had to escape. He fired his grapnel at a distant rooftop. The line went taut, and he swung up just as the bird-masked operative leapt, its fingers grazing his boot. He landed on the roof, running, changing direction erratically. They followed, relentless. He was leading them away from the tower, away from Tsunade. Wrong direction. He altered course, leaping a gap between buildings. As he landed, a sharp, searing pain erupted in his left shoulder. A senbon dripping with a paralytic. His left arm went numb, clumsy. He tore the needle out, but the toxin was fast-acting. His vision blurred at the edges. The three figures closed in, forming a triangle around him on the roof. "This ends," Foxmask intoned. A blur of green dropped from the sky like a meteor. "Dynamic entry!" The rooftop shattered under the force of the kick. The bird-masked operative was obliterated, smashed into fragments of porcelain and something wet and organic that wasn't quite blood. The other two were sent flying. Might Guy landed in a crouch between Batman and his attackers, his signature bowl cut and bushy eyebrows, a welcome, absurd sight. "Kakashi's mysterious friend. It seems you've attracted the attention of some very rude party crashers." Before the remaining operatives could recover, 3 more figures landed. Shikamaru Nara, his shadow already stretching across the roof. Ino Yamanaka, hands forming signs. Choji Akamichi, cracking his knuckles. "Troublesome," Shikamaru sighed, though his eyes were hard. "But we can't have guests of the Hokage getting ambushed. It's bad for the village's image." Guy gave a thumbs up. "The power of youth arrives in the nick of time. Leave these fakes to us. Go!" Batman didn't need telling twice. He lurched toward the Hokage Tower, his left side dragging, the world swimming. He heard the sounds of renewed combat behind him. Guy's joyful shouts, the thwump of Choji expanding, Shikamaru's strategic commands. He reached the tower, half falling into the entrance, startling the guards. "Tsunade, Orochimaru, underground annex," he managed. The guards' faces went pale. One sprinted up the stairs. The other supported him. Minutes later, he was in the strategy room, slumped in a chair as Tsunade, flanked by a team of jonin he didn't recognize, listened to his ragged report. When he said Orochimaru's name, the room went deathly quiet. "Here? In the village?" one jonin whispered, horrified. "Kabuto, using stolen materials, abducting civilians. He has a lab beneath the scribe's annex." Batman forced the words out. "Kakashi engaged. Guy's team is fighting the impersonators on the eastern rooftops." Tsunade's face was carved from stone. "Sound the general alert. Evacuate the surrounding districts. Mobilize every available jonin and ANBU squad. Seal the annex. I want that tunnel network mapped and surrounded." She turned to Batman, her gaze assessing his injury. "You're done. Report to the hospital." "No." Batman pushed himself upright, his right hand gripping the table. The pain helped clear the fog. "You need every asset. I know the entry point. I've seen the layout. And I am immune to most standard toxins. The paralytic is already wearing off." Tsunade stared at him, weighing his will against his wounds. Finally, she gave a sharp nod. "Fine. But you stick with the team. You are not to engage Orochimaru. Understood?" "Understood." As the village erupted into organized chaos, alarm bells, shouts, squads mobilizing, Batman accepted a mild stimulant from a medic. He looked out at the night, now alive with leaping ninja and flare signals. He had come to this world a stranger. He had become a student, a detective, and now an accidental catalyst. His investigation had not uncovered a mere criminal. It had exposed a cancer growing in the heart of Konoha, a traitor's hand reaching from the grave of the recent invasion. Orochimaru was here, and because of a scribe's misplaced brush, a baker's last loaf, a tailor's thread, and a potter's clay, the hidden leaf was about to go to war within its own walls. The bat had found his case, and it was far worse than he imagined. The annex was now the eye of a storm. Anbu Black Ops swarmed over and around it, sealing every conceivable exit with barrier tags that glowed in the night. Jonin teams formed concentric perimeters, their expressions grim. The air hummed with suppressed chakra, a vibration Batman could now feel as a physical pressure in his newly awakened pathways. He stood with Tsunade and her command group on a rooftop overlooking the site. His left arm was still clumsy, the paralytic's last effects fighting the stimulant, but his mind was a razor. "We have the main entrance sealed," reported a masked ANBU captain. "Sensory teams detect multiple life signs below, but they're muddled. There's heavy interference, possibly experimental dampening fields." "Orochimaru will have bolt holes," Tsunade growled, cracking her knuckles. "Old escape tunnels even the archives don't know about." "He also has hostages," Batman added, his voice cutting through the tactical chatter. "The 4 civilians, and potentially others." His experiments seemed ongoing. Tsunade's jaw tightened. Rescue is a priority, but containing Orochimaru is existential. If he escapes back into the shadows with whatever he's learned here. She didn't need to finish. "We go in 3 prongs. Team 1, led by me, hits the main lab. Team 2, under Yamato, secures the side tunnels and rescues hostages. Team 3, she looked at Batman, then at Shikamaru, who had arrived with a slightly scorched but triumphant guy. "Recon and disruption. You locate and sabotage any research data, experimental subjects, or escape mechanisms. You do not engage the primary target. Is that clear?" Shikamaru nodded. Troublesome, but clear. "Batman." Tsunade fixed him with her gaze. "You know the immediate layout. You lead Team 3 to the lab entrance. Then you fall back. Your skills are for investigation, not fighting a Sanin." He gave a curt nod, though the order rankled. He was a soldier in this fight now, whether she acknowledged it or not. Minutes later, they descended back into the secret tunnel. The atmosphere was transformed. Where there had been eerie quiet, there was now the thrum of active machinery and the distant panicked shouts of Kabuto's puppet workers being overrun by Yamato's squad. Team 3, Batman, Shikamaru, and a quiet, efficient Jonin named Sai, whose expression never changed, moved quickly toward the reinforced lab door. The sounds of full-scale battle echoed from deeper within. The thunderous impacts of Tsunade's punches, the sizzle of Kakashi's lightning, and the sinister, hissing laughter of Orochimaru. They reached the lab door. It was sealed shut, glowing with complex security formulas. Sai produced a scroll and a brush, beginning to methodically dismantle the seals. 30 seconds, he said, his voice flat. Shikamaru's shadow stretched under the door. I can sense 2 people inside. One prone, weak, one standing, anxious. Not Orochimaru, probably Kabuto. "The hostage," Batman said. Kenji was still in there. The seal gave way with a faint pop. Sai kicked the door open. The lab was as Batman had seen, but now in a state of frantic packing. Kabuto was hurriedly shoving scrolls and vials into a sealing pouch. On the table, Kenji lay unconscious, the intricate seal on his chest pulsing faintly. He was alive, but pale as death. Kabuto spun, a scalpel flashing into his hand. His eyes widened behind his glasses at the sight of them. "You, the variable. I should have dissected you when Danzo first brought you in." So Danzo had delivered him to Orochimaru's attention. The pieces clicked. "Stand down," Shikamaru said, his hands forming the sign for his shadow possession jutsu. It's over. Nothing is over, Kabuto hissed, and threw a handful of smoke pellets, a crude imitation of Batman's own tactic. The room filled with dense gray fog. Batman's lenses switched to thermal. Kabuto was a blur of heat, darting toward a secondary door. Sai flung ink-black tendrils that whipped through the smoke, but Kabuto was agile, ducking under them. He's escaping. Secure the hostage, Batman ordered, charging after Kabuto. The secondary door led not to a tunnel, but to a smaller, darker chamber lined with cylindrical tanks. Inside the greenish fluid floated vague, humanoid shapes, failed experiments, clones, or preserved subjects. The air reeked of formaldehyde and ozone. Kabuto stood at a control panel, his hand hovering over a large red switch. You should never have come here. The Master's work is too important. What work? Batman demanded, stalking forward, his eyes on the switch. A self-destruct? A release mechanism for the tanks? Evolution, Kabuto said, his smile fanatical. Transcending the limits of the shinobi body, combining the durability of medical ninjutsu with the adaptability of foreign biological templates. Your world's peak human physiology was particularly intriguing data. He'd been studying him from a distance, through reports, perhaps through root surveillance. The thought was a violation. And the civilians? What does a baker have to do with evolution? Chakra conductive materials require delicate handling. Sustenance requires specific nutrients. Clothing must survive cellular expansion. Kabuto shrugged, as if the answer were obvious. They were the support system. Now, they are part of the system. His finger twitched toward the switch. Batman didn't have a batarang. He had a fraction of a second. His right arm, the damaged one, screamed in protest as he willed Chakra into it. Not for a technique, but for raw speed. He pushed the energy through the scorched pathway, not to mold it, just to burn it. White-hot agony lit up his nervous system, but his hand moved faster than it ever had outside the DC universe, snatched a discarded metal clamp from a surgical tray and threw it. It wasn't a precision strike. It was a desperate, painful lunge. The clamp struck Kabuto's hand, knocking it from the switch a hair's breadth from activation. Kabuto cried out, more in anger than pain. He formed hand signs with his other hand, serpent, ram, tiger. Medical ninjutsu, scalpel. A blade of condensed green chakra extended from his fingertips, humming with lethal precision. He lunged. Batman sidestepped, the scalpel grazing his armored ribs. He couldn't match Kabuto's medical ninjutsu or chakra control. He had to change the game. He backed toward the tanks, his eyes scanning. You're outmatched, Kabuto sneered, advancing. You have power, but no skill, no finesse. You're a blunt instrument in a world of scalpels. Sometimes, Batman grunted, you just need a bigger hammer. He slammed his fist, reinforced with the last of his agonizing chakra surge, into the base of the nearest tank. The glass, designed to withstand internal pressure, cracked under the focused, superhuman blow. Fluids gushed out, and the suspended body within slumped to the floor. Kabuto's eyes widened in genuine horror. You fool! That specimen is invaluable! Batman grabbed the slippery, inert form and shoved it toward Kabuto. The medic jumped back, disgusted, his concentration broken. In that moment of distraction, Shikamaru's shadow, elongated through the open doorway, slithered across the floor and seized Kabuto's ankles. Got you, Shikamaru said from the doorway, strain in his voice as Kabuto struggled against the binding. Sai was beside him, already producing ink creatures to secure the medic. Batman moved to help, but a sudden, massive tremor shook the entire complex. Dust rained from the ceiling, A deafening roar echoed down the tunnels, followed by Tsunade's furious shout. "The main lab's collapsing," Sai stated. "Orochimaru's making his exit." Shikamaru grimaced. "We need to go. Now." They hauled a cursing, struggling Kabuto between them. Batman returned to the main lab, where Sai's ink clones were gently extracting Kenji from the table. The seal on his chest was fading, but his breathing was shallow. Another tremor, stronger. A support beam cracked. "Leave the data. Go," Batman ordered, supporting Kenji's other side. They stumbled back into the main tunnel, now filled with debris and the sounds of retreat. Yamato's team was ushering the other 3 dazed, terrified civilians ahead of them. One of the bakers was clutching his rolling pin like a weapon. They burst out of the annex into the cool night air just as a section of the street behind them collapsed inward with a grinding roar, swallowing the building. Anbu were already erecting containment barriers around the new sinkhole. Tsunade emerged from a cloud of dust, her clothing torn, a cut on her cheek but her eyes blazing with fury. Kakashi limped beside her, his Sharingan eye closed, a nasty burn across his shoulder. "He got away." Tsunade spat the words like poison. "Through an earth tunnel that shouldn't have existed. Took his core research with him." "But we have this one," Yamato said, shoving Kabuto forward. "And the hostages are safe." Tsunade's gaze swept over the rescued civilians, then landed on Batman, who was lowering Kenji to a waiting medic. She saw the fresh blood soaking through his armor at the ribs, the way he cradled his trembling right arm. "You were told not to engage." Kabuto was a secondary target with critical intelligence and a self-destruct switch. The engagement was necessary. Batman's voice held no apology. For a moment, he thought she would argue. Then her shoulders sagged, the Hokage's mantle feeling heavy. The intelligence? He confirmed Danzo's involvement in directing Orochimaru's attention to me. The experiments were aimed at biological enhancement, using my physiology as a template. The civilians were support staff for creating specialized materials. He met her eyes. This wasn't just Orochimaru operating in your backyard. He had a patron inside the walls. He had a mission that started the moment I arrived. The implication hung in the air, toxic and undeniable. Danzo had not just tolerated a security threat, he had actively cultivated it, feeding a traitorous Sanin information and resources, risking the entire village for his own ends. Tsunade's face went from exhausted to enraged. She turned to a nearby ANBU captain. "Place Danzo under house arrest. Seal the route headquarters. Anyone who resists is to be subdued." "Hokage-sama," the captain said, his voice cautious. "On what charges?" "Treason," she said, the word final and cold. "And if he wants to argue the point, tell him to explain why his signature is on the requisition forms for the stolen medical steel." As the ANBU scattered to carry out her orders, the night descended into a different kind of chaos. The cleanup. Medics tended to the rescued. Construction ninjas stabilized the collapsing ground. Jonin debriefed. Batman stood apart, watching the hive of activity. The immediate threat was over, but the political explosion was just beginning. Kakashi approached him, holding his injured arm. "You used your chakra, aggressively. I can feel the pathway from here. It's a mess." "It was necessary. It was reckless. You could have lost the arm." Kakashi's visible eyes studied him. "But you saved the hostage and captured Kabuto. So, reckless and effective. A very Shinobi combination." He offered a small, pained smile. "Welcome to the club." Shikamaru wandered over, looking more tired than Batman felt. "Troublesome, all of it. But good work. Your detective thing, it's not completely useless." It was, from Shikamaru, high praise. Tsunade finally approached him, her expression unreadable. "The village owes you a debt. You uncovered a cancer we didn't know was growing. You saved lives tonight." "I did my job. You did more than that." She sighed. "Danzo will fight this. He has allies. This is going to get ugly. Having you, an outsider with no clan loyalties, whose actions tonight are a matter of record, could be an advantage. Or it could make you the biggest target in the village. I've been a target before." "I know." She looked at him, and for the first time, he saw something like respect in her gaze, not just calculation. "Report to the hospital. Get that arm properly treated. Then get some rest. The next few days are going to be long." As a medic led him away, Batman took a last look at the scene. The hidden lab was a smoldering ruin. A traitor was in custody. A shadowy power broker was about to be challenged. The delicate balance of Konoha had been shattered, and he was the stone that had been thrown. He had arrived a ghost. He had become a weapon, a detective, and now a catalyst for change. In the hospital, as a medic applied soothing green chakra to his ravaged pathways, Bruce Wayne stared at the ceiling. The pain was a distant throb. His mind was already analyzing the next moves, the political fallout, Danzo's likely response. He had stopped a monster tonight, but in doing so, he had stepped fully into the light of Konoha's brutal, complex world. There was no going back to being a hidden curiosity. The bat was out of the bag, and the shadows of the leaf would never be the same. The dawn after the battle did not bring peace. It brought a tense, brittle silence that settled over Konoha like a shroud. The physical scars were being addressed. The sinkhole filled, the annex sealed under a mountain of fresh earth and powerful barriers. But the political wounds were just beginning to fester. From his hospital room window, Batman watched the village. The usual morning bustle was subdued. Shinobi moved in tighter groups, their eyes scanning not just the perimeter, but each other. The Anbu presence had tripled, and not all of them wore Tsunade's authority. Some bore the sharper, more angular masks of Root, though they now moved with a defensive wariness, like wolves scenting a trap. His right arm was immobilized in a chakra-infused cast, the pathway inside slowly knitting under the constant care of the medics. The cost of his desperate surge of power was a stark lesson. This energy was not a tool to be hammered with, but a live wire that could burn its wielder. The door slid open without a knock. Kakashi entered, looking more tired than Batman had ever seen him. He carried a small scroll, which he tossed onto the bedside table. "Danzo's response," Kakashi said, his voice flat. Batman broke the seal with his left hand and unrolled the parchment. The script was formal, dense with political jargon, but the message was clear as glass. It was not a denial. It was a declaration of war. To the Hokage, Tsunade Senju, the allegations presented are the fabrications of a traumatized mind and the machinations of a foreign agent seeking to destabilize Konoha in its hour of vulnerability. The individual known as Batman is an unverified dimensional entity whose very presence violates natural law. His investigation was an unsupervised intrusion into secure areas, and his testimony is therefore inadmissible. The capture of the criminal Kabuto is commendable, but his inevitable lies, extracted under duress or genjutsu, cannot be used to slander a loyal servant of the Leaf. The now destroyed laboratory, if it existed as described, was clearly the work of the traitor Orochimaru alone, who has long sought to frame this council for his atrocities. The order for my arrest is unlawful, born of panic and the undue influence of an outsider. Root stands as the true shield of Konoha, and I will not allow its integrity or my own to be compromised by this charade. I have retired to the root headquarters to await a proper hearing before the full Shinobi Council, where evidence, not hearsay, will determine truth. Until such a hearing is convened, any attempt to enforce the unlawful arrest will be viewed as an attack on Konoha's security apparatus and met with appropriate force. Danzo Shimura, advisor to the Hokage, commander of Root. He's fortified himself, Batman stated, letting the scroll roll shut. He's turned himself into a hostage to force a political showdown. He's also publicly named you as the source of the fabrications, Kakashi said, his eye dark. You're now the focal point, the foreign element corrupting the Hokage's judgment. Half the clan heads are nervous. The other half are waiting to see which way the wind blows. And Tsunade? Furious and trapped. If she storms the Root compound, it's civil war. Shinobi killing shinobi inside the walls. That's exactly what Danzo wants. To paint her as a reckless tyrant. If she backs down, her authority is broken forever. Kakashi leaned against the wall. He's played this game for decades. He's very good at it. Bruce's mind raced, analyzing the battlefield not of flesh and chakra, but of perception and authority. He needs the council to legitimize him. A hearing. When? 3 days. He's demanded it, and protocol supports him. All clan heads, the civilian council, the Jonin commander. They'll hear evidence from both sides and vote. And the likely outcome? Kakashi was silent for a long moment. Danzo controls at least a third of the votes outright, through fear, obligation, or shared ideology. Another third are traditionalists who will side with the established, stable power against what they see as the Hokage's risky alliance with an alien. Tsunade might hold a minority, unless something changes the calculus. Something like irrefutable proof, Batman said, his gaze turning back to the window, to the village whose heart was being torn in two. Not testimony. Evidence that cannot be dismissed as lies or manipulation. What kind of evidence? The lab is destroyed. Kabuto's testimony will be dismissed. The stolen steel is circumstantial. Batman's thoughts went to the lab, to the tanks, to Kabuto's fanatical words, combining the durability of medical ninjutsu with the adaptability of foreign biological templates. Your world's peak human physiology was particularly intriguing data. He was using me as a template, Batman murmured. That requires a sample, blood, tissue, something he could study. He looked at Kakashi. I never gave one. So where did he get it? Realization dawned in Kakashi's visible eye. The forest. The fight with the INBU who captured you. You were injured. They took you to a holding cell, but before that, they had my body for a period of time, unconscious. The violation was clinical, but no less infuriating. Danzo's Root had first access. They could have taken samples then and passed them to Orochimaru. If we can find those samples, or the research derived from them, in Danzo's possession, it directly links him to the traitor. It's a good theory, Kakashi conceded. But finding it. The Root compound is a maze of secrets, more fortified than the Hokage's own bunker. And in 3 days, he'll have sanitized everything. Then we don't have 3 days. Batman stood, ignoring the protest from his body. We have tonight. You're in no condition. My condition is irrelevant. This is the play. Danzo has made it a game of evidence. We find evidence he cannot explain away. Batman's voice was steel. I need access to the Root headquarters, not to fight, to investigate. Kakashi studied him, then sighed, a sound of utter resignation. Tsunade will never authorize it. If you're caught, it validates all of Danzo's claims about foreign espionage. then we don't ask for authorization." A slow, grim smile spread across Kakashi's face. "You know, for a man with a no-kill rule, you have a remarkable talent for courting catastrophe. It's a specialty." The plan was insane. The root compound wasn't just guarded, it was a living fortress. Its very walls woven with detection seals, its corridors patrolled by operatives who had sacrificed their identities for the mission. Going in loud was suicide. Going in quiet seemed impossible. But Batman had spent a lifetime doing the impossible in Gotham. And he had something no root operative would expect: a complete outsider's perspective and a mind trained to find the pattern in the chaos. With Kakashi's help, he acquired detailed architectural plans of the public areas of the compound. Blueprints that were undoubtedly riddled with hidden passages and traps, but were a starting point. He studied guard rotations, not from surveillance reports, but by observing the patterns of light and shadow from a distant vantage point over the previous night. His target wasn't Danzo's office. It was the lower levels, the archives, the cold storage units, where one would keep biological samples. As night fell, Batman stood on a rooftop a quarter-mile from the root compound, his suit patched, his utility belt restocked with basic tools from Konoha's quartermaster. His right arm was a liability, strapped tight to his chest. He would have to succeed with stealth, not strength. Kakashi appeared beside him in a swirl of leaves. "I've created a distraction at the eastern gate, a minor seal malfunction that will look like an attempted probe by a rival village. It will draw sensory focus for 12 minutes. That's your window to get inside. After that, you're on your own. 12 minutes is enough. The entrance you'll use is a maintenance conduit for wastewater. It's foul, but it bypasses the primary ground-level seals. It leads to a sub-basement near the archive wing. From there," Kakashi shrugged, "you're the detective." Batman nodded. "If I'm not out by dawn, I'll disavow all knowledge and be sincerely surprised by your foolish, unilateral actions." Kakashi finished, his eye crinkling. "Good luck." The descent into the conduit was as unpleasant as advertised. Batman moved through pitch darkness, his lenses providing a green-hued world view, the only sound the drip of stagnant water and the scuttle of oversized insects. The smell was oppressive. After 50 yards, he reached a grated outlet. Through it, he could see a dimly lit stone corridor. He disabled the simple physical lock and slid out, silent as a shadow. The corridor was empty, the air dry and cold. He was in. Following the mental map he'd constructed, he moved toward the archive wing. He avoided the main halls, sticking to service corridors and ventilation shafts. Twice, he froze as pairs of root operatives passed, their blank masks giving nothing away, their chakra signatures suppressed to near invisibility. They moved with a chilling, synchronized efficiency. He reached a heavy door marked with sealing symbols for biological containment. This was it. The lock was complex, a blend of mechanical and chakra-based triggers. He had no tech to hack it, but he had observed the hand signs Kakashi used to disable similar seals. He couldn't produce chakra from his damaged arm, but he could from his left if he was careful. Focusing, he drew a tiny, controlled thread of energy, a minuscule amount compared to last night's torrent, and formed the mental patterns Kakashi had taught him. He pressed his left palm against the seal. The complex lines glowed, resisted, then faded with a soft click. The door swung inward. The room beyond was a library of flesh. Rows of chilled cabinets held vials of blood, tissue samples, and organs floating in preservative. Labels identified them by code, not name. He moved down the aisles, his eyes scanning. He needed something recent, something that wouldn't be part of a standard catalog. In the very back, In a separate, newer cabinet with higher-grade security, now disabled, he found it. The labels were different. One read, Subject, K01. Source, Dimensional Anomaly, Gotham. Tissue, dermal, muscular. Analysis, enhanced cellular density, abnormal neural conductivity. Compatibility with Hashirama cell fusion. Project Ghetto. Priority. Next to it were slides, detailed cellular maps, and a logbook. Batman flipped it open. The entries detailed the acquisition of the sample. Acquired during initial containment, Forest of Death. The transfer to approved external consultant, Snake Sanin. And the progress reports on the fusion experiments. The authorizing signature on every transfer order was a single, sharp character. Danzo. This was it. The smoking scroll. Not just a link to Orochimaru, but evidence of Danzo's own forbidden experimentation. The fusion of foreign biology with the unstable, potent cells of the first Hokage. A crime that would horrify every traditionalist in the council. He carefully sealed the logbook and several key samples into a waterproof pouch. As he turned to leave, the ambient chakra in the room shifted. A presence, cold and heavy, filled the doorway. I knew you would come. Danzo stood there, not in robes, but in full combat attire, his bandaged right arm held slightly away from his body. His single eye was pits of cold fury. 4 Root operatives flanked him, their masks somehow more menacing for their blankness. You walk into my home, steal my property, and believe you can simply walk out? Danzo's voice was soft, deadly. You have been a thorn since your arrival. Tonight, I pluck you out. Batman didn't speak. He assessed. 4 elite operatives. Danzo, an unknown but undoubtedly formidable quantity. 1 functional arm, no chance of fighting his way out. You have no right to that research, Danzo continued, stepping into the room. It is the property of Konoha, for Konoha's security. You are a thief, and now you will be a corpse, killed resisting arrest after infiltrating our most secure facility. A tragic end to Tsunade's folly. The operatives advanced. Batman's hand went to his belt. He had 1 smoke pellet left. It wouldn't stop them, but it might confuse their sensory techniques for a second. He needed a second. But before he could move, Danzo's eye widened slightly, looking past him. A new voice, lazy and familiar, drawled from the shadows at the back of the room, near a ventilation duct Batman hadn't noticed. You know, Lord Danzo, for a man who talks so much about Konoha's security, you have a lot of unguarded air ducts. Kakashi Hatake stepped out of the darkness, his headband tilted up, the crimson Sharingan spinning slowly in his exposed eye. He wasn't alone. Behind him, Might Guy gave a thumbs up, and Yamato's stern face was set in lines of determination. This intrusion is now authorized, Kakashi said, his voice losing all its laziness. By order of the Hokage. You are outnumbered, Danzo-sama. Stand down. Danzo's face twisted into a snarl. You side with this creature against your own village? I side with the Hokage, Kakashi corrected. And the evidence, which Batman now has. The game is over. For a long, tense moment, Danzo looked from Kakashi's team to Batman, to the pouch at his belt. He saw not just defeat, but exposure. The revelation of the Hashirama cell experiments would turn even his allies against him. His bandaged arm began to twitch, the seals on it glowing faintly. Don't, Yamato said sharply, his hands already forming signs. You know I can counter it, and a fight here destroys everything you've built. Is that the legacy you want? To be remembered as the man who shattered Konoha from within? Danzo froze. The glow faded. The fight drained from him, leaving only a bitter, ancient exhaustion. He was a man who had lived too long in the darkness, and the light when it finally came, was merciless. He looked at Batman, pure venom in his gaze. This changes nothing. The council will still hear my case. They will, Kakashi agreed. And they will also see this. He gestured to the pouch. Now, you will come with us. Quietly or not. The choice is yours. Danzo's shoulders slumped. He gave a sharp, disgusted nod to his operatives, who lowered their weapons. The defiance was gone, replaced by the grim acceptance of a checkmate. As Yamato moved forward to apply chakra-suppressing seals, Batman met Danzo's eye. There was no triumph in his gaze, only the cold satisfaction of a case closed. He had come to this world lost. He had been used, studied, and hunted. Now, he had turned the hunt back on the hunter. He had the evidence. The hearing would be a formality. The Shadow War was over. Now came the reckoning. The Shinobi Council convened not in the usual sunlit chamber, but in the Hokage's secure briefing room, under the glow of sterile white lights. The atmosphere was less that of a hearing and more of a funeral for certain political ambitions. The clan heads, the civilian representatives, the Jonin commander, all sat in stiff silence, their eyes fixed on the center of the room where two men stood. Danzo, proud and unyielding even in defeat, and Batman, a silent, armored monolith beside the Hokage's podium. Tsunade did not preside from her seat. She stood before them all, the evidence scrolls laid out on the table beside the stolen logbook and sample vials. She did not shout. She did not accuse. She simply presented, her voice clear and cold as mountain ice, recounting the timeline from the stolen steel to the abducted civilians, from Orochimaru's lab to the Root Archive. When she held up Danzo's own logbook, open to the page authorizing the transfer of Batman's tissue to Snake Sanin for Project Gedo, a ripple of horror passed through the room. The Hashirama cell experiments were the ultimate taboo, a perversion of their first Hokage's legacy. These are forgeries. Danzo's voice cut through the murmur, sharp but lacking its former certainty. Planted by the outsider to divide us. The sealing signatures are yours, Danzo, a wizened elder from the Authentication clan stated, his magnifying lens lowering from the scroll. The chakra impression is unique and unforgeable. This document is genuine. The dam broke. One by one, the clan heads who had been poised to support Danzo out of tradition or fear withdrew. The Uchiha survivor, wary of all power plays, nodded grimly at Tsunade. The Aburame head, a man of few words, simply said, "The hive is compromised. The rot must be excised." The Hyuga elder remained silent, but his refusal to meet Danzo's gaze was condemnation enough. The vote was not needed. Danzo saw the verdict in their eyes long before Tsunade formally stripped him of all titles, dissolved Root, and placed him under perpetual confinement in a specially constructed cell deep beneath the torture and interrogation unit. His life's work, his network of shadows, was unraveled in a single, brutal morning. As the council filed out, the weight of the crisis lifted, leaving behind the heavier burden of aftermath. Batman remained, watching as Danzo was led away, the old man's back straight, his disgrace of final, brittle armor. When the room was empty save for Tsunade and Kakashi, the Hokage let out a long, weary breath, the strength draining from her. "It's done." "No," Batman said quietly, drawing their attention. "It's just beginning. You've cut the head off the snake, but the body, Root, the ideology, the fear he cultivated, it still writhes. It will need careful dismantling, reformation." Tsunade looked at him, really looked at him, seeing not the asset or the threat, but the strange, relentless mind that had just upended her world. "You sound like you're planning to stick around to oversee it." "My path home is unclear, And this village, he gestured to the window, to the leaf symbol carved into the mountain, has a justice system, but it doesn't have a detective. It has soldiers and spies. It needs someone who can find the truth in the shadows, without a clan name or a personal agenda to cloud the view. Kakashi chuckled. Asking for a job, Batman's son? Stating a need and offering to fill it. He met Tsunade's gaze. On my terms, I operate independently. I report to you and only you. My methods are my own, and my rule, no killing, remains absolute. Tsunade was silent for a long moment, weighing the offer. An independent agent, beholden to no clan, a truth finder in a world of lies. It was unprecedented. It was dangerous. It was exactly what a village built on secrets and hidden agendas might need to heal. You'll need a cover, she said finally, a ghost of her usual smirk returning. We can't have the Batman wandering the streets. The children would have nightmares. I have a name. Bruce Wayne is dead in this world. Here, I am simply the detective. Let the name be a rumor, a story told in whispers. Thus, a new arrangement was forged. A small, secluded building on the edge of the administrative district, damaged during the invasion and since abandoned, was quietly refurbished. It was not the Batcave, but it had a basement that could be secured, space for an analysis lab, and a rooftop access that suited his methods. Konoha's artisans, grateful for the rescue of their own, worked discreetly, asking no questions. Weeks passed. The village began to heal, the tension easing as the shadow of Root receded. The story of the foreign detective who helped purge a corruption became a legend, morphing with each retelling. Some said he was a spirit of vengeance. Others, a wise hermit from a distant land. Bruce did nothing to confirm or deny. Let them wonder. His days fell into a new rhythm. Mornings were dedicated to grueling chakra control exercises with Kakashi, slowly, painstakingly healing and strengthening his damaged pathways. He learned not to blast, but to flow, to enhance his senses, his speed, his strength with minute, precise expenditures. He would never be a ninjutsu specialist, but he could become something else, a hybrid, a warrior whose shinobi abilities perfectly complemented rather than replaced the lifetime of training and technology he embodied. Afternoons were for his work. Tsunade sent him cases, a pattern of sabotage in the weaponry division, a suspected leak in the cryptography team, a cold case of a missing heirloom that was poisoning inter-clan relations. He solved them with methodical, foreign logic that cut through shinobi assumptions. He became a ghost in the machine of Konoha, a neutral, party trusted precisely because he belonged to no part of it. One evening, as autumn leaves began to litter the streets, Shikamaru found him on his rooftop, looking out over the village lights. Troublesome, Shikamaru said, joining him at the ledge. You've made detective a respected title. Now the kids all want to be logic nin instead of mastering their clan techniques. My father is annoyed. Progress is often annoying, Batman replied, his voice lighter than it had been in months. Shikamaru was silent for a moment. You know, they're going to come for you eventually. Not Danzo, others. People who fear what you represent. Enemies you make just by existing outside the lines. I know. You need someone to watch your back. Someone who finds all this interesting. Shikamaru glanced at him. And troublesome, but mostly interesting. It was as close to a request for apprenticeship as the brilliant, lazy Nara heir would ever make. Bruce gave a slow nod. Your strategic mind would be an asset, but my methods are uncompromising. I'd expect nothing less. So, a partnership began to form. Not master and student, but two analytical minds. One seasoned in the darkness of Gotham, the other in the shadows of the leaf. Months turned. Bruce Wayne, the Batman of another Earth, did not fade. He evolved. He crafted new tools adapted to this world. Chakra reactive smoke pellets, grappling lines woven with chakra conductive wire, a lighter, more flexible armor, forged from a blend of local alloys and his own designs. He remained an outsider, but he became a known outsider. A piece of the village's strange new mosaic. He never found a clear way home. The dimensional rift that brought him seemed a unique event. But in the quiet of his new base, studying chakra theory and the fabric of this reality, he began to wonder if that was the point. His mission had always been justice. Gotham was a city. Konoha was a world. The scale had changed, but the purpose remained. One night, a year after his arrival, a scroll arrived by Hawk, marked with Tsunade's personal seal. He opened it. The detective. A situation in the land of rivers. A Konoha trade envoy has vanished. Local authorities are unhelpful. The mission is officially investigation and recovery. Deniable. Team consists of you, Shikamaru, and Sai. Leave at dawn. T. Bruce placed the scroll on his desk. He looked at the batsuit, now modified, hanging in its case. He looked at the map of this world, with its unknown lands and hidden dangers. He was not Bruce Wayne of Gotham, not a ninja of Konoha. He was something in between, a legend transplanted, taking root in foreign soil. He picked up his modified grapnel gun, checked the charges in his new Chakra-capable utility belt, and prepared for the mission. The Bat had found a new cave, a new city to protect, a new endless war on crime and corruption, fought with different weapons, under different stars. But the mission remained. The mission always remained. The story of the Batman in the Naruto world is not one of conquest or domination, but of profound, seismic adaptation. He did not come to rule or to teach, but to survive. And in surviving, he inadvertently became a mirror held up to Konoha's soul. He exposed its hidden rot not through overwhelming power, but through relentless truth, a currency this world of deception had undervalued. In a society built on bloodlines and secret techniques, he proved the terrifying power of an unprejudiced mind and an uncompromising will. He leaves a legacy not of changed power dynamics, but of changed possibilities. The detective is now a whisper in the halls of the Hokage, a ghost story among genin, and a very real check on the shadows that every shinobi village cultivates. He is the outsider who became the village's conscience, the wild card that reshuffled the deck. Konoha is stronger for his trial by fire, but also more self-aware and thus more vulnerable in its honesty. Bruce Wayne may never see Gotham skies again. But in the dark nights of the Hidden Leaf, a different kind of watchman now stands guard. He operates not from a cave of bats, but from a quiet building on a side street. The criminals he hunts wield chakra instead of guns, and the shadows he uses are woven with ancient secrets. But the fear he strikes, the hope he represents, and the unwavering line he draws in the sand, that is universal. The Bat has found a new world, and that world will never look at its own darkness the same way again.